Call to order the Monday, October 28th, 2019 regular meeting of the Littleton Planning Commission. Could we please have the roll call?
Chair Rudnicki?
Here.
Vice Chair Schwartzbacher? Sorry.
I do that too. Yes, I'm here.
Commissioner Bolt?
Here.
Commissioner Coronado?
Here.
Commissioner Reynolds?
Here.
Commissioner Stallman?
Here.
Commissioner Almond?
Here.
I'm here too.
We have a full house tonight.
Did you say Miller?
I did.
Oh, I'm here.
Maybe I skipped over it.
Yeah, well.
Are you here?
Yeah.
All
I
right.
think
We're good to go. We've got
All
a
right.
quorum.
You look like you're here.
Next up is the Pledge of Allegiance. If we'd all stand, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Next up is the approval of the agenda. We only have one item, so I assume nobody wants to rearrange the schedule? Right? Okay, good. Next up is minutes to be approved. Let's see, that's for our October 14th, 2019 meeting. Do we have a motion?
I move to approve, based on the clerk certification, the October 14th, 2019 minutes of the Littleton Planning Commission.
Okay, we have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? We vote then. Oh, and you're not allowed to vote. You weren't there.
I did watch the video.
All those in favor, the motion carries 6.
Actually, David watched it, the video, so he can vote.
Yes.
Okay,
The vote is 7 in favor. The motion carries unanimously.
okay, thank you. Next up is public comment. If you wish to address the Planning Commission on items that are not on tonight's agenda, you'll have 3 minutes to speak. We expect the discourse to be civil. When you have 30 seconds left of your 3 minutes, the yellow card will be held up. When your 3 minutes are up, the red card will be held up. We do have a sign-up sheet. If you haven't signed up to speak, you can speak. I'll call you afterwards. We have one name, Pam Chadbourne.
You sure you pronounced that right? You sure you pronounced that right?
Good evening, Planning Commission. My name is Pam Chadbourne. I still live a block and a half from here. So unfortunately, from my point of view, and contrary to Littleton's best interests, the comprehensive plan and the transportation master plan passed, and I think they're not ready for prime time, and I've said that, so this is no surprise to you. And one of the issues that citizen after citizen pointed out, and I've heard it said at public comment, is it's a very interesting process in which a plan was approved and a future zoning, future land use map, which is supposed to guide zoning. But we have no rules of the game to guide how that zoning will be. Not a single example was worked for a property or a proposal that might be in process and how on the future land use map with a suggested use, how that would progress through zoning. What if we did this? What if we did that? What are the rules of the road? You can see that, I've been told that the urban downtown doesn't really mean urban. There's a big range of what could happen, and not a single example was shown to us, much less 5 or 10 for the various districts that were described. So citizens have said, we would like some kind of moratorium and control on actions taken by Planning Commission and City Council regarding zoning between the approval of the comp plan and the zoning process, because we don't have a clue how it's going to go. We were promised, though, that we would work out a lot of these issues in zoning. we didn't have to worry about the comp plan. It was a living document. We will change it, and we will work out what happens in zoning. So I'm here to bring that up and to say that citizens have a huge interest in understanding what's going to go on, but we don't. And so, Planning Commission, I'd like you to think about some kind of moratorium or control or limit on rezonings and other development applications that occur between now, this vulnerable period. We have a very undefined land use map, purposely so, and a zoning process that's promised in the future, but which we have no idea how is going to work out. The city has said this is a community-based process. The public drove it. We didn't. And you need to help us keep control of it. Otherwise, something else bad is going to happen. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that wishes to speak on a matter not on tonight's agenda? Seeing no rush to the rostrum, we'll move on. General business, we have none. We'll go to our public hearing, PC Resolution 13, 2019, recommending approval or request to rezone property from IP and IP PDO to PDR, known as the Delaware and Powers Project, to 241 West Powers Avenue. Before we start, we'll go around the horn as usual. Have you visited the site, and have you talked to anybody since the application was made? Sherry?
I did visit the site. I did not speak with anyone.
I visited the site numerous times, but I did not speak with anyone.
Likewise, I visited the site but did not speak with anyone.
I had visited the site in the past, and I did not speak to anyone.
And I visited the site numerous times and lately have not spoken to anyone.
I visited the site back when we were looking at it for self-storage, and
Okay.
haven't been back since and haven't talked to anybody.
Same here. I visited the site back when we did the P4 review and did not speak with anybody at that time.
I have visited the site and I have not spoken to anybody.
Okay, great. Thank you. We'll go with our staff report now.
Good evening, Planning Commission. I'm Andrea Mimnall at the planning staff. I've served as project manager for this project, and I have with me many members of our staff, and I'd like to name who they are. We have Mike Sutherland, our Deputy Director of Planning, Jennifer Henniger, our Director of Community Development, Denise Stevens, the Director of Economic Development, Dylan Cowing, Engineer with Public Works, and Colton Hargith with Economic Development. The application before you tonight is for an 8.8 acre parcel of vacant land in the Progress Park neighborhood, also known as the Northeast neighborhood. The address is 241 West Powers Avenue, and the applicant is requesting approval of a rezoning from industrial land to residential land. This is a quick overview of the different topics that I'll be hitting on the presentation. First, we're going to go over the process and where this project lies within the overall development process. Next, we'll talk about the application and its details. Then there will be a section on review criteria and analysis, staff recommendation, and then Planning Commission action. In terms of the process, we're here tonight for rezoning and plan development plan, and this will can be a recommendation to City Council, and City Council, you can make a recommendation of approval, of denial. You can also postpone the hearing till another evening. And then eventually, if it gets to City Council, Council has the ability to approve the rezoning. Following that, there would be applications for subdivision, which is approval by City Council, and then site development plan, which is an administrative review. The project is located in Progress Park, as I mentioned before, and it's at the corner of Delaware and Powers. You can see it on the map here. It has the yellow line highlighting it, and the larger green line around it is the boundary of Progress Park. The site's also in close proximity to Broadway and West Littleton Boulevard. Zooming in on the site just a little bit, this map helps discern what are the adjacent uses. And you can see north of the site in that purple area is the property owned by Norgren. Norgren has been there since 1950, and they are an R&D, a very large company, which once had its headquarters here and now still has facilities in this location. In the gray areas that you see to the west and the south, and also to the east, is multifamily residential housing. The red area is commercial land. There have been a few previous actions on this site, which I'd like to point out. And the first was that a planned development overlay was approved by the Planning Commission. That was in 2017, and it was for a self-storage facility. Specifically, the planned development overlay was applied to allow for the height of a multi-story self-storage facility. You can see where that PDO was located. It's colored in kind of the brownish red color in the eastern portion of the site. Also, there was a special use exemption concerning the floodplain that was approved earlier this year in January, and the area of that floodplain is highlighted in yellow on this map. There was also a P4. P4 is preliminary project plan process, and the P4 went before Planning Commission and then also City Council. In your packet, you can see a summary of what the comments that were received were from the Planning Commission and City Council, and then I've added in a column about what the applicant has done with that information. The comments that are received as part of the P4 application are non-binding. This application, the P4 application is heard prior to the formal submittal of an application. So a summary of what was modified as a result of the P4 is listed here. As a result, there's lower maximum density, the provision of guest parking, relocation of some open space, and breaking up of the building mass along Delaware Street. We'll get to application details later and have more information then. Okay, so the map that you see here is from the plan set, and it is the concept plan. A concept plan is not a site plan that would necessarily be developed. The purpose of it is to show how the zoning that's being proposed might be developed on the site. And so this plan, I think, is actually probably very close, if not identical, to what the applicant would like to develop. But there could be other configurations as well under the zoning that's been proposed. Again, the entire site is 8.8 acres. The maximum number of units under the proposed planned development plan is 85, and that's about 10 dwelling units per acre. The PD plan requires that there be a pocket park with a minimum size of 10 acres, and you can see it on this concept plan in the southwest corner. There's a landscaped buffer on the north end of the property, and per the PD, that needs to be a minimum of 25 feet in width. There is internal pedestrian circulation. There's a total of 50% open space, and that includes common open space and private open space. The PD plan requires street trees and guest parking. Moving into how the lots would be laid out, and how the units would be put onto them. This diagram shows 3 units. The black line represents the property line, and the green area within the property line would be private open space. And then you can see the common open space that wraps around those lots. So the idea behind this is that the particular homeowner would have little to care for in terms of open space, and the homeowners association would take care of all of the landscaping and would take care of the open space on the common areas that you see in the lighter green area. Also, what you can see from this diagram is that there are some very small setbacks. And so in the front, it's just 1 foot. On the sides, it's a minimum 3-foot setback. So there would be, when you have 2 units next to each other, as you see here, there would be a minimum of 6 feet between buildings. However, the applicant will probably go into this a little bit more. There may be up to 10 feet between units. And then there's a 4-foot setback in the rear, and that's, of course, where cars enter from the alley into the garage. This is also part of the concept plan. These are some elevations that are shown, and you can see that they are contemporary in nature, and they have vertically oriented windows. The materials would be brick, stone veneer, tile, and stucco. 40% of the units will include brick. And I'd like to point out that it was pointed out to me just a little earlier this evening that in my summary of the P4 comments, I did write that the 40% of each unit would be brick, but it's actually 40% of the units overall will include brick. The maximum height for these units is 45 feet when they include a rooftop deck. And you can see the stairwell that climbs above the 3rd story. Without the 3rd story, without the rooftop deck, then the maximum height is 35 feet. Not all units would necessarily have a rooftop deck. I believe it is an option. One of the site design details that was modified following the P4 was the orientation of units along Delaware Street. And I've highlighted that in yellow on the concept plan. Originally, the units were oriented so that front doors faced the street. There were comments received that the lineup of all of the homes facing Delaware created the image and look of a very large building. Because of the fact that the homes are close together, it would be hard to distinguish that there's actually room in between those units. And so what the applicant has done to redesign is to turn those units on their side. And so there would be, between those rows of units, there would be either green space or an alleyway in which to access your garage. For those side units that do face Delaware Street, there are some design standards that the applicant has established. The PD would require there would be at least 2 building materials, at least 5 windows, and at least 1 3-inch minimum depth of plane relief. So in other words, there would not be a side wall that was completely flat and smooth. There would be some relief and interest there for pedestrians and others to enjoy. So now moving into the review criteria and analysis, there's quite a bit of review criteria for a rezoning and plan development plan. And what I've done is I've picked out a few of the criteria that I believe are most important. Of course, the full analysis is in your staff report. And the first criterion here has to do with utilities, transportation network, drainage systems, and open space. And the requirement is that the nature intensity of the development be supported by the utilities, transportation, drainage, and open space to serve the development and to minimize impacts on adjacent and existing and future development. So utility lines are in close proximity to this site. Drainage can be met on-site by use of a detention pond, and open space is provided throughout the development. There's a requirement for an internal pedestrian pathway and the provision of a pocket park. One of the other criteria within a rezoning is that the new zone is consistent with the comprehensive plan. And so I've placed some of the comprehensive plan policies and goals up here for review. And the first one is a dynamic Littleton. And I should say that this application came into the city earlier in the year at the time when the 2014 comprehensive plan was in place. So this application is being analyzed against that plan in place. Of course, the new comprehensive plan of 2019 was just approved on the 15th of this month, and so that is not applicable to this application. So going back to the comprehensive plan policy, up here, the dynamic Littleton, again from the 2014 plan, the first one is to encourage housing that responds to changing demands in the local housing market, allows every generation and income group to call Littleton home, and is otherwise consistent with the plan. The next one is evaluate the redevelopment potential of blighted properties. Work with owners throughout the redevelopment process to encourage sustainable uses and structures. Design the redevelopment so that it mitigates its negative effects, if any, on adjacent uses and structures. The 2014 comprehensive plan also had a Progress Park neighborhood plan component, and goal 2 of that plan was to limit new high-density residential development as well as the encroachment of commercial and industrial development into existing and residential areas. So, staff feels that these criteria are met, and although single-family homes may be lower density than was often associated with mixed use, the proposed PD plan envisions up to 10 units per acre. The proposed development will eliminate a blighted property and complement existing surrounding uses through its architectural design, pocket park for community use, and landscape buffers at the perimeter of the site. Many blocks within the eastern portion of the neighborhood are short on landscaped areas, and the introduction of street trees and landscaped areas should provide a needed lift. It is possible that the development may act as a catalyst for redevelopment of nearby properties, including the commercial properties along the Broadway corridor. Residents and others who seek low-maintenance properties with the ability to walk and drive to short distances to goods and services may find this type of development in short supply within the city of Littleton. Staff's opinion is that the goals and policies of the citywide plan, as well as the newly adopted 2019 comprehensive plan, are supported by this development. And I bring in the 2019 plan because the vision for this area is mixed-use commercial corridor. There's a mixed-use commercial corridor that runs along Broadway and also along West Littleton Boulevard. And because the 2014 plan doesn't provide any specific vision for this area, I did include the 2019 designation here. Of course, the Planning Commission can't make a determination based on the 2019 plan, but it may help you work through the 2014 comprehensive plan criteria in terms of your analysis and weighing the different policies and goals.
that it?
No?
No? Okay. Pregnant pause.
So with this application, the city is doing something new with this Planning Commission report, and that is to include an economic analysis of the application. And the economic analysis was requested by City Council at the time that they heard the P4 and had an opportunity to comment on it. And I will say that the city has changed quite a bit since the beginning of the year in terms of its focus on economic development and sustainability. And we know that with the 2019 Comprehensive Plan, there is a focus on economic development. And also that later this year, we are expecting a full citywide economic analysis. And so with that in mind, I think council wanted to get on the ball and see what an economic analysis might look like for this site, changing zones from industrial to residential. And so for this criterion, I have pulled out the vision for the future of Littleton. And if you look at the bottom 2 bullet points, it says strive for sustainability in economic, environmental, and social decisions, and raise the bar to increase the quality of community and economic development. The economic analysis is attached to your report, and also it includes, the analysis is included in your report as a summary. And to these 2 points that are highlighted, I've pulled from that, and the analysis from the economic report is that the lack of commercial space and residential development, that there is a lack of commercial space in the city of Littleton, and residential development generates less revenue by greater costs than non-residential development. This is according to the city's consultant, Tischler Buys. The consultants encourage city staff to facilitate non-residential development. The rezoning would eliminate a parcel that could possibly be used for needed commercial space in the future. So, overall, we have rezoning criteria, and that's been analyzed by the Community Development Department. We also have this Economic Development Department, and this comes up actually with a recommendation for denial, while the Community Development's analysis comes up with a recommendation for approval. And so, yes, you do have 2 different recommendations for staff coming towards you. And I believe it's up to the Planning Commission for you to look at the criteria for rezoning and a planned development plan, some of it which does address to some extent economic development and sustainability, and you may use the information from the economic analysis in making a determination on that criterion. And overall, staff felt that the criteria is met. Planning Commission may differ. So again, staff is recommending approval, and that's the Planning Commission recommend approval to City Council for the rezoning of 8.8 acres, 241 West Powers Avenue in the Progress Park neighborhood, and that it's consistent with criteria for PDR zoning. The Planning Commission has several options tonight. You can approve, you can recommend approval, you can recommend approval with conditions, you can recommend denial, or continue to a date certain. And I'll be available for any comments, questions that you have, and the applicant is also here to make a presentation.
Okay, thank you. We'll start out with questions of staff. Sherry, you want to start?
Excuse me.
Speak.
I have one question. It's really more for Denise, I guess.
Can you
That's
speak right
appropriate?
into the microphone?
Yes, I have one question, and it's for Denise, if that's appropriate right now.
You have one
For
question?
Denise. Okay, I will just ask the question. Has there been any recent interest in this property for commercial development?
No, there hasn't. And basically, our concern is that with the limit of commercial property that is left in the city and the very low vacancy rate for industrial properties, that this would forever remove the opportunity for an industrial or other commercial uses.
That it? Jason?
Okay. Curious, I don't recall, but hopefully staff does, the height that was approved in the PDO for the self-storage facility?
I believe it was 35 feet in height. Now, what's interesting about that is the zoning code has a maximum height for self-storage facilities of 12 feet. And that was put in place back in the 1980s before we had really seen the multi-story self-storage facilities. And so the purpose, again, of this PDO was to allow for the multi-story, and it was up to 35 feet in, I believe, at least one section of the site plan.
And the height limit in the industrial zoning without the PDO? Okay. We can move on to other questions while they look that up.
Bruce?
Okay. Given the proximity, and I don't recall this either from the self-storage case, but given the proximity to Norgren, has anybody done any soil testing?
That would be a good question for the applicant.
Okay. And so we shall do so. The other question I guess I was going to ask is, has the applicant had any other development activity within the city?
I think the applicants can speak to that as well, but Richmond American did develop in part of Littleton Village.
Okay.
I believe they're the same, very similar product, the cityscapes over there in Littleton Village, and they also developed some more traditional, larger lot, single-family homes over there.
Okay. What has been the city's experience with them as a developer?
Well, I'm not sure that I've heard comments either way.
Has anyone? They've done development, but we don't have any feedback as to.
I'm not sure exactly how that would fit in with any of the criteria for the rezoning, Commissioner Stallman.
I guess hypothetically, what I was wondering was, I think one of the ramifications with respect to PD is, a negotiated arrangement whereby we afford flexibility in the zoning in exchange for high quality developments and so forth and so on. I just was trying to get some history. I kind of think it is applicable.
I get concerned when we start talking about users and uses when it comes to a rezoning application.
Okay. All right. And let me see. The property seems to slope to the north. The elevation declines to the north based on, I looked at it the other day, and they've got, the Norgren's got a big detention pond or a pond out there on their property, which is north of this property. Are there any issues from staff's perspective vis-a-vis the landscaping that would be required to accommodate the topography? I don't know if it's probably, we've got a, the floodplain I forget what we called it, but the floodplain has been amended to,
The special exception.
a special exception, that's right. So any other issues with the topography from a drainage standpoint, given this development?
I guess I'd like to call up Dylan Kelling, our engineer from Public Works, to help us with that question.
Good evening, I'm Dylan Cowan with the Public Works Development Review Engineer. In regards to drainage, nothing of particular concern. There is a couple options in place for a detention pond, which would require a little bit of coordination with the Norgren property regarding the outlet of the pond, but certainly nothing that can't be worked through.
So no heartburn?
Correct.
Okay. All right, I'll pass the baton.
Jason's question, do you have an answer?
Yes. In the industrial, the IP zone district, there is no height limit for structures.
Rob?
Yeah, I believe it's a 2-to-1 FAR though, right?
Yes, I believe you're correct.
So that would be where that would come in. Thanks for the detailed analysis that you put into our packet. I appreciate that. So my first question is on page 4, where you had a timeline, started at 1950, from Norden first came in, and then it skipped to 2017, about when that piece of property was sold. Was there any activity, any attempt to sell between the 1950 and the 2017, or was that the first time it was attempted to be sold?
To my knowledge, that was the first time they attempted to put it on the market.
Thank you. On page 10, you're talking about the open space. So my question's about detention, the detention area. This might be more for the applicant, but do you happen to know what percentage of the open space the detention pond is? I can wait for them if you don't know offhand.
Okay, that
That's
sounds
fine.
good.
So when is a detention pond necessary in this particular case? So why would it be the detention pond versus if you have a single-family homes where you don't have the detention pond because the houses are farther apart and such?
Right.
I'd like to hear the definition between that.
Okay, then again, Dylan Cowing.
Thanks, Dylan.
Logan. Detention, we actually recently adopted some new drainage criteria, and they're based on a percentage or a total impervious square footage. So any new development now, if the property is currently over 10,000 square feet of impervious and they plan to redevelop it, they would be required to provide detention and water quality. And if it's a brand-new site, again, over 10,000 would kick that in.
So it's for the whole site, the 10,000 feet, or a piece of property? I'm trying to compare to when, so in here they've compared themselves to an R3 upon a time in certain circumstances. If you had an R3 development, would there be a detention pond?
Good question. It is, I believe it is tied to the property itself, but we also look at overall development. So if there's a lot of individual properties that would create a large impervious amount, we would certainly probably push to have detention and water quality for that type of site as well.
So the detention pond doesn't have anything to do with that all of the buildings are closer together as opposed to if they were an R3 where they'd be spaced much farther apart from each other?
That could come into play sometimes when you look at water quality, the spacing of the buildings and open space area. But in general, we look just at that 10,000 square foot threshold, and any sort of development, whether it's part of a larger common development or individual, if it's at 10,000, we're going to have some sort of water quality and detention involved with it.
So at this point, if someone had come in with an R3 and had built those and then had the lots that they wanted to have, you would still require a detention pond of the size and what they have there?
It would be my belief, I'd superiors that might, would need to look at that. But I would say yes, because it would be part of a larger overall development. And I believe in our criteria, there is certain phrasing that would pertain to that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I think this is back to you, Andrea. On page 17, this is discussed as a blighted property. Could you please define blighted?
Blighted.
Yeah, on page 17 of your
Yes.
staff report, it's called a blighted property.
Yes, well, blighted property is property that can be very unsightly, a property that is in terrible, if there's structures on it, in terrible disrepair, and possibly abandoned property.
So in this case, it's a vacant lot.
Yes, I would characterize it as blighted because it doesn't have a landscape plan on it, and there have been, weeds allowed to grow on the property from time to time, and there are also a number of trees there that are struggling to survive.
So with that definition, we have several properties off Mineral that also fit that description, so you would consider that blighted.
I'm not sure what properties you're referring to.
I'm looking down in South Park. When you go down Mineral, there's still areas that are vacant. There's nothing on them, and they would fit a similar description to what you said. So that's why I was trying to understand your terminology for blighted. This would be probably for you, Denise. Do you have any thoughts on why this is still vacant? It seems like it would be mostly because it's never been put up for sale before, from what you had said.
That's my opinion. Yes.
Okay, and thinking about South Park, which also has vacancies, do you see them trying to fill their vacant land with residential?
I think with current zoning, there's only a few places that's possible.
But
I
rezoning-wise?
I do believe that the market is driving residential development right now. So I think where that opportunity exists, most developers are going to try to develop with some residential component, if not
Okay.
exclusively so.
No other questions, thank you.
David?
Somewhere I read in here that this property's been available for at least a decade. Somewhere else it said that in the staff report, I can't find it now, but somewhere else I read that it's been available for decades. I don't know if that's true or not. Not that it's been for sale necessarily, but Norgren's not developing it. It's just a vacant piece of property. Do we know what, if it wasn't available, what was it going to be used for?
Well, it's been vacant for a long period of time. However, I believe the first time it was on the market was in 2017. I think part of it was they've been expanding globally, and I think they had possibly considered expanding their own campus for a while, and that's why they were hanging on to that land for a period of time to determine if they were going to expand their own campus. But I've only seen a couple of people show interest in it, and they were industrial uses, but they did not maintain that interest in the property. I do think, however, though, with the limited vacancy that we have, the limited industrial properties that are available in the Denver metro area, that with a lot of industrial properties being taken up in other jurisdictions that allow grow houses, that industrial properties or capability of building industrial properties here will become more attractive.
So are you saying that they should build a grow house there?
No, I'm saying because we don't allow grow houses, that
Okay.
it would be attractive for other more desirable industrial uses.
Okay, but it hasn't so far, except for do we know why the self-storage property did not
That I
come
don't
to
know.
fruition?
Well, I don't believe we know a specific reason. I can tell you anecdotally in the planning office, we had received many, many calls from developers looking for land for self-storage facilities. And in fact, we did get one approved through the PDO process. Subsequently, right around that time of approval, those phone calls dropped off. And so I believe that the market was probably saturated with that type of facility.
And I would agree. I think that those that were proposing self-storage had looked at the market and this area in particular and had determined there was too much saturation.
Okay. And so there hasn't, you said there hasn't been a lot of interest in development. You haven't seen a lot of proposals for this site?
Well, I think that the people that purchased the land from Norgren had thought that they would hold the land for a period of time to try and determine what they'd like to do with it. So the one industrial use that was interested in the property would have been a good companion to Norgren. I think they left because they didn't want to sign for the undergrounding of the utilities. They just didn't feel like they could make that commitment.
Okay. And let's see. So I was looking at the conclusion to the economic analysis, and it's actually in the summary on page 7 of the staff report. It's the same or page 8, same list of conclusions, but they're bulleted by paragraph. The second bullet talks about how retail isn't a good fit. I don't see what it says about office, but it says something about industrial properties having a high per square foot market rent. What is that? What are you comparing that to? What does high mean?
Well, it's kind of interesting, and I'm not exactly sure what to make of this conclusion, but when we pulled information, we are showing a 0.1% vacancy rate in the city of Littleton, and a 10-year low average market square foot of $13 as compared to Denver Metro in the larger scheme of things, which is at $9.10 per square foot. So I'm not really sure what to make of that. I would assume when you have less industrial space like we have, then they can charge more per square foot for it.
Right. So what's the source of that information?
That's CoStar.
CoStar, okay. All right. And what, in your experience, are the, just comparing vacant industrial land taxes, like the taxes we would collect or we are collecting on this vacant land versus taxes we would collect on improved residential properties? Is it more or less?
Well, what we would have is, if it's land that is zoned commercial or industrial, it is assessed at 29%. Our mill levy currently is, I think, 6.77%, but it will drop to 2 mills in 2020, and that'll be the 2 mills on whether it's residential or commercial. So residential is assessed at, I believe it's 7.9%, and our mill is still very low. So obviously, we want retail uses if we can, because we can get some sales tax generation off of that in addition to the commercial. But it could be argued that the service requirement for residential is higher than for commercial. And so valued at that lower 7.9% at the 2 mills versus commercial at 29% 2 mills. So we would get more for commercially zoned property.
So for vacant land versus improved land? Like, so we're collecting taxes on this vacant land that's zoned industrial. You know, we've had not a lot of interest in it, and it hasn't been developed in 67 years since Norgren developed their property. We're continuing to collect taxes on this vacant industrial land. Now, somebody's proposing to build residential property. So then people are going to buy the houses, presumably. They're going to pay taxes. Are their taxes in total going to be higher than a vacant piece of industrial land? Is my question.
I would say lower, because the land is currently taxed, or it's currently valued at 29%.
Okay,
When it is rezoned to residential, it will be valued at 7.9. I'm sorry, I don't know the specific amount off the top of my head. The two mills are the same, but residential is valued at a lower rate, a fairly substantial lower rate, so.
okay. Okay, so we'll be, with the rezoning and a development, we'll be collecting less taxes than just leaving it vacant.
Yes.
Okay. And then, the other thing I wanted to ask, well, I'll ask this first. If we were to approve this change and nothing became of it, like the self-storage, could we revert back to the, what it is now? If we did an addend, what do we call it? Not an addendum. When we add on to a resolution.
Amendments?
Okay, so, yeah, an amendment, I guess. I guess I had the right word.
No, this is a rezone.
This is a
This is a
rezone.
rezone.
Right,
You can't go back.
that's what I'm asking.
You could
Yes.
rezone a rezone. We're doing that with
Rezone
the...
or rezone,
Yes.
but you wouldn't go
Somebody would
back.
have to come in and ask for it.
Yes.
Okay.
And I would defer to the city attorney about whether that could be done or not.
Theoretically, I guess it would be possible to put a condition within the actual rezone approval that said if, after 3 years, if it hasn't come into fruition, then it reverts back to the PUDI.
Yeah, I know a lot of mountain towns now are doing this where, because in the past they hadn't, where people would get an approval for a property to be built, and then it's an infinite approval, so they can just sit on it until they decide to build on it if the market goes south. So what they're doing now is giving somebody 3 years, otherwise it gets wiped out, and then that's a little bit different. It's not a rezone, but that's kind of what I was thinking of. Okay, so I think my last question is, on page 5 of the staff report, it was just confusing. I think I know what's going on here, but in the section where you say Planning Commission comments on a preliminary plan, you refer to council members. And then kind of in the middle of the table below, there's a comment that says a few units of affordable housing would be desirable to council members versus additional affordable housing if not needed in the area, one council member. And then in the council member section, you have the exact same one as the third section. I'm just wondering how that came about, if there's something missing here from the planning commission side. I just don't understand like how that happened and what's missing there if
Yes, thank you, I see it now. That was somehow duplicated into the Planning Commission area, and it was comments that were made at the City Council P4.
Right. So
there, I don't believe that these comments at all were made during the Planning Commission P4.
yeah, so you don't think there's something missing there that it got copied over? It's just an addition to.
Yes, I believe that's just.
All right, I just wanted to double check that. I think that's it.
Okay, Greg?
Okay, a few more questions for the economic development side. Building on the sort of opportunity cost loss by a rezone, and the economic analysis is pretty clear. Does it consider the impacts that a rezone would have on the surrounding businesses, like the ones along Littleton Boulevard and Broadway, that might be positively impacted by
Yes.
more rooftops? in the
Actually,
area?
and we do concede that having nicer for sale homes in that area would contribute to the local economy because those people are going to be spending their money in the area. In our report, we included some information from Streetlight data, which monitors where people are coming from and where they're shopping. And it's pretty clear that most people that live in that vicinity spend most of their grocery money, which is one of their larger expenditures, at our local grocery stores. So that's a positive.
Okay. And I know beyond the King Soopers there in that shopping center, there's a lot of businesses along Littleton Boulevard there that have struggled and turned over during the years. And it seems like there'd be a positive impact from having additional residents in that area.
No doubt. It's a little hard to quantify, but later on, if this does go through and it is built, we would be able to determine that to a greater degree.
Okay. And then I know in the past the city's had sort of economic, the economic gardening program, ideas that sort of promote types of businesses in here. If this was to stay in the current zoning as a separate parcel industrial, is there anything that the city would be doing to help market that as a preferable site for that type of use?
Yes, when properties are on the market, we do let people know. We do receive inquiries, site selection inquiries down from the state. And when those come through to us, when we have the inventory, if there was an industrial user that was looking to do a build-to-suit, then we would definitely promote that property for that reason.
Okay, thank you. A couple of questions for Andrea. First, I just wanted to confirm one thing. I think you said it before, but on the staff report on page, 16, under the Envision Littleton review, under anchored, it says the design standards call for facades that will have a minimum of 40% brick on the exterior. I think you corrected that it would be 40% of the buildings would have some measure of brick. Is that correct?
Yes, thank you. The criterion on the proposed PD plan is that 40% of the buildings within the project would have brick.
Okay, okay. And then when it describes masonry material, I think there is a minimum percentage of masonry material on all the buildings, stone, brick,
Yes.
tile. You
Yes.
consider stucco masonry?
I don't believe we consider stucco masonry, no.
Okay, I think that's listed right now as a masonry element.
Okay.
So,
Okay, we could,
all right. I defer to my architect friends to help with that definition.
Don't think it qualifies. Did you mention stone? Stone, it was part of the lineup.
Yes, stone is in there. Then also on the plan set, I think it's the first or second sheet where all the development standards are, design standards. There's 13.1 states that all sides facing the street should require a second material. But it wasn't clear what that was, and maybe that's a question for the developer.
yes, so on those units that have side facades facing a public street, like the concept plan shows along Delaware, at least 2 building materials would be used, would be required to be used. So in other words, you wouldn't have a situation where it was all stucco, all stone, or any one particular material, and that the reason for that is to provide variety.
Ready, okay. But it's not stipulating what type of material, it's just another material.
That's right,
Okay.
at least 2. Yeah.
Okay, all right. And then the last question I had was on the landscape plan, I guess on the site plan on all of them, where we have the new sidewalk and the street frontages on the 3 sides. It shows all the trees on the inboard side of the sidewalk. I'm used to seeing a development plan like this with them in the tree lawn between the sidewalk and the curb. Is there a reason?
Yes, the applicant can probably address this more, but it has to do of the location of utilities.
Okay, trees should come first, not utilities, but just my opinion. Okay, all right. That's all I have, thank you.
Dan?
Yeah, Andrea, I just want to kind of clarify sort of our actions are tonight. If the Planning Commission votes to approve this this evening, I guess what I just want to understand is what are we locking in? And I've got a list of stuff, if maybe you can say yes or no. are we locking in the building height?
Well, let's just first preface it by that the city council has the authority to actually
Fair
approve.
enough.
So it would be your recommendation. So yes, it would be building height, yes.
Exterior materials,
Yes.
building orientation?
No, not necessarily.
Okay. Amount of open space?
Yes,
Land use?
Yes.
yes.
And then density?
And, I'm sorry?
Density.
Density, yes.
So if there are some, I'm just like, if building orientation, if there's some comments about building orientation and it affects the density, then what happens? Would that be approved by staff administratively, or?
Well, density cannot be modified at an administrative level. So so if the density were proposed to increase, that would need to come back through the amendment process, which would go through Planning Commission and again through council as well.
Okay. Just, if we could be clear on the definition of open space. I know there's 3 definitions in the city code, and it's kind of, I see all 3 being used. And so I just wanted to be clear, the 50% open space is it open space, is it common open space, or is it unobstructed open space?
Okay, so.
All have different, right? There's different sort of qualities to those.
Well, there is common open space and private open space, and both of them have the same definition as being unobstructed open space. So private open space would be that open space on a privately owned lot. Common open space is open to all of the members within all of the property owners or renters within the development. And generally, it is maintained by a homeowners association. And unobstructed open space means that there would be no structures on that space and no spaces on which a vehicle would drive. So what you can have in unobstructed open space is landscaped areas, hardscaped areas, sidewalks, patios that are flat and on the ground, and you could even potentially have something, you could have something like a gazebo. And of course, you could have a play structure as well.
So, but this application is speaking specifically about which, the 50% is?
Yes, so in order for a PD to be approved, it has to have a minimum of 50% of the area as unobstructed open space. And that can be either common open space, private open space, or a combination. And so in this proposal, we have a combination.
Okay. Let's see here, hold on here. Are you aware if the applicant has explored or discussed other, I say land uses when it comes to residential? I know this is single family is being proposed, but is a duplex considered single family townhome, or are those allowable uses in this, I guess in this plan development?
Once you attach units together, then they can be called single-family attached, or they can be called duplexes or townhomes. This is a single-family detached product that is being proposed and is being set forth on the PD plan.
Mm-hmm. Has the applicant ever discussed the potential for duplexes or townhomes? I mean, apparently they are allowed in an R3 and in an R4 zoning. I'm just curious.
Yes, the applicant did, when they came to the city, they did express a desire to develop their cityscape-style homes, which also exist out at Littleton Village.
Okay, so I'm hearing no.
Well, they could maybe provide more information,
Sure.
but it was not discussed.
Sure. And then live-work units those aren't an existing beast in our current zoning code, is that correct?
Yes, that's generally correct, although you could potentially do live-work units, yes. There's another opportunity for home occupations, but there's a limited amount of percentage of area within the home that you can designate for a home occupation.
And would that generate more tax revenue? No, still single-family? Okay, that's all I have.
Okay. A few quick questions. The top of the deck, I assume the deck will have solid walls that's a parapet. Is that the 35-foot height limit, the top of the deck parapets?
The top of the deck parapets, it's correct, isn't it? Yes.
Okay, I can ask them. One nice thing about the relaying out of the site is there is a gap in the units on Delaware Street, which is very good. But there's also gaps in the units facing Powers. This is illustrative of layout, which means it could change. I like those gaps in that it breaks up the house 6 feet, house 6 feet all the way down the street there with no relief. These gaps where there's sidewalks into the interior really help out that facade. How enforceable down the road are those gaps along Powers?
Under the current PD plan, they're not required. So if the Planning Commission would like to ensure that those gaps exist, we would need to the Planning Commission would need to craft a modification.
Well, I could ask you and maybe them as to what they're showing now for width, and we might have an amendment. We'll get to that in a bit. In the plan set on page 3 and 7, many of the floor plans, footprint plans of the units have asterisks around them. What do those asterisks mean?
Well, the asterisks are actually those units that have side facades that face alleyways. And so if you notice on sheet 2, there are criteria for side elevations that face alleys, and then more criteria for those side facades that face a public street.
You might have a key added for city council.
Okay.
To say, what do the asterisks mean? Let's see. Measurement of height is 35 feet, and then extra for the towers, access stair towers. How is height calculated? Obviously, they're raising the property towards the north. Is the 35-foot limit to existing grade, historical existing grade, or is it to the built-up grade?
The current zoning code measures height from the finished grade. So it's the highest point within 5 feet of the structure, and then you measure up from there.
Okay. Last question, it looked like it was answered. At one time, the Delaware units the front were facing directly there, just a row of 10, 15 units. That has changed. Okay. And Robin mentioned blighted. That raised an eyebrow here. That word was misused quite a bit during the lift hearings. I think it's been needs to be gently used, and it shouldn't have been used in this case. Bruce, you had a couple of questions?
I was just going to follow on. You'd mentioned HOA. There's no metro district or anything associated with this. It's too small for that, I assume.
The applicant has not expressed a desire for a metro district.
Okay, so the HOA is an assumed, or is it something that's more than assumed?
If there is common open space, as shown in this conceptual plan, then in fact there would need to be assurances by the city that that common open space would be maintained, and that would be generally through an HOA.
Okay, okay. No, okay. Okay. Based on the setbacks, your staff seems to be comfortable with the level of density vis-à-vis the comprehensive plan criteria. Help me understand that setbacks strike me as reasonably dense, but help me understand staff's logic with respect to why that satisfies the lack of density criteria in this neighborhood.
The lack of density criteria?
Well, I think the criteria in the neighborhood plan was less, prefer less dense infill development, whatever the specific language was, but there was an implication that there'd be less dense development rather than more dense. This strikes me as on a continuum towards more dense, given 1 to 3 to 5 foot setbacks.
Yes, well, the staff took into account that there is multifamily housing existing on 3 sides of the development at a higher density. And so this seemed like a compatible use in that it was single-family, lower density, but yet they are on smaller lots with open space. And I think if you were to convert the maximum 10 units per acre that is being proposed with this development to one of the straight R residential zones, it would come out to an R3 or an R4. If not these small lots, another residential style on this style development on this lot could be larger homes with no common open space.
Okay, all right, that's helpful. I appreciate that. That seems well thought out. Last question I had was in the packet is applicant's response to economic analysis, and on the first page of that document, point number 4, the last sentence is, while the property remains vacant, there are potential homeowners who remain sidelined in apartment living and potential consumers not residing in proximity to the businesses they would support. In the letters, 2 letters of support you gave us at the dais this evening, one of the letters talks about the person who submitted the letter says we bought a brand new home, a cityscape home, for less than $450,000. I guess the question I was going to ask, is that a fair assessment of the price points on these, such that the statement that people who are in apartments might be able to afford getting into some of these, if these are all $600,000-$700,000 units, that strikes me as being inconsistent. But if these are in that range, then the issue, the criteria with respect to the comprehensive plan in terms of a viable mix of housing options is a lot closer to being satisfied. So do we have a sense of what the price points would be, or is that an applicant question?
Yeah, I think that would be an applicant a question. Of course, the cityscapes over in Littleton Village were developed now a couple of years ago, and so that price point could potentially be changed at this point. But I will say that a mix of housing to suit residents can also not necessarily be related to price, but related to style of housing. And so the cityscapes does offer something that's not too readily available in Littleton, that is a single-family home with low maintenance because of the small size of the lot.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions of staff?
I just have one follow-up. I know it was mentioned that part of the idea was to underground the power lines around the perimeter of the site. Is that, what's the status of that, and whose responsibility is it to do that?
It is the applicant's responsibility to bury power lines at the applicant's cost. There is potentially a fund out there that Excel has. They set aside a little bit of money to assist communities with undergrounding, but we'd have to look into that and see if that would be applicable to the situation here.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Anything else? Okay. We'll have a applicant presentation, if you'd like to make one.
Good evening, and thank you. My name is Jason Pock. That's P as in Papa, O-C-K. I'm with Richmond American Homes, 4350 South Monaco Street, Denver, Colorado. First of all, I want to thank you all for your time here tonight. I've been thinking a little bit about how this portion of the presentation here tonight should go, just sort of in the context of all the many great questions that you all have asked. I think our assumption was that we would go ahead and do our full presentation and then answer your questions. If you feel that your questions are still very lively now and you want to ask some of them before the presentation, I think we can certainly be flexible there. I'm just going to kind of look across the board and see what feels right. Should we just continue, or do you want to address a few of them?
You will continue with the presentation, then we'll ask you questions afterwards.
Perfect. Well, I've made a few notes here, and so we'll try to touch on a few of the points that you all have brought up. My portion of this is going to be very brief. I just want to introduce myself and the development team and Richmond. Again, my name is Jason. I am a land manager with Richmond American Homes. With me here tonight, Susan Wade and Mark Saval, our planning consultant and civil engineer with Redland. These are our experts that are helping to guide us through this process. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Richmond American Homes, we are the largest home builder in Colorado, but more importantly, we are one of very few home builders that are headquartered here in Colorado. Our corporate headquarters is just down the road in the tech center. And I mention that because I think it's very important to understand that whether it's a superintendent or all the way up to our executive suite, these are people that live and work right here in the Front Range. We're not taking orders from a distant office. There's a real belief that we're creating homes and neighborhoods that we ourselves are living in. And I think that makes us better shepherds of the communities where we build. I will not stand in front of you and tell you that we get all the details right all the time. That's certainly not the case. But there are countless thousands of parts and pieces of people and planning decisions that go into each and every home and each and every community. And I feel very strongly standing in front of you saying that you will not find another group of people that are more committed to doing what's right by our customers. So with that, I will turn this presentation over to my colleagues at Redland to walk us through some of the details of the project, and then we'll all work together to answer your many questions.
He's taller than I am. Hi, my name is Susan Wade. I'm a senior planner with Redland. Address is 1500 West Canal Court here in Littleton. So Andrea stole my thunder on a lot of bullet points, so I'm going to save time and kind of go through things relatively quickly. As Andrea had mentioned, the site is located west of Broadway, north of Powers, between Delaware and Bannock. We are surrounded by residential on the west and the south, industrial and business on the north and the east. The process, we have completed the P4 process, had a neighborhood meeting in early December. January and February, we had Planning Commission and City Council P4 meetings. We're currently in the GPDP zone to establish our zoning density. In the future, we'll go through our subdivision and SDP process, and then final construction and document platting. So our outreach really began when we first met with the city on February 5th. We shared with them our initial concept plan, discussed the rezone process and the floodplain modification requirements. The neighborhood meeting on the 4th, we only had about 3 or 4, maybe 5 people show up. Some of their comments were they were happy about the single family, increasing their community character. They were pleased to see residential in terms of improving their home values. They were concerned with the floodplain modification and any impacts that may have on their property, and they were concerned about guest parking on the perimeter street at the time we were allocating guest parking. The P4 process with Planning Commission and City Council, although most of you were there, some of the things we heard were they liked that the open space and the single family met with the Prospect Park goals. We heard concerns about the attached density or the detached density and height. We heard concern about the on-street parking as well as the change from industrial zoning. Our overall density goals, our overall project goals really focus on providing housing diversity. This is a for-sale urban housing product that's not commonly found in this area at a price point below traditional new single-family prices. We want to bring investment in this community. We believe that this is a remaining stagnant parcel with opportunities that have passed itself over time. We believe that we will be bringing energy and focus back into this neighborhood. We want to encourage healthy lifestyle. We have over 4.5 acres of open space. We have neighborhood pocket parks that greet the community. We have trail corridors and green courts. We want to improve the overall street scene. We want to underground the utilities. We want to remove the unsightly chain link fence, improve the sidewalks, and bring the ADA ramps up to be in compliance. And we want to improve the underutilized infrastructure. We think that the existing perimeter streets allow that infrastructure connection. So as Andrea said, the 2014 citywide plan, I won't go through all of the exact same goals that we do meet that Andrea had already mentioned. But we were actually really intrigued with the Envision Littleton, the 2019 plan that was just approved earlier this month. Although that's really not what we have followed these last year and a half going through this process, we are intrigued with the corridor mixed use component that this property is now identified as. This property now will identify as commercial, office, services, as well as residential for mixed use, attached and detached single family. So to me, that tells me that the city is envisioning this as something a little differently than industrial. We also neighbor the mixed residential component, which actually I find it funny that the photo was used in the Envision Littleton is right next to this property in terms of a mix of both single family and attached housing. The site plan really focuses on greeting the street. We really heard a lot of the comments that came out of the P4. We reduced the number of homes fronting and siding along the perimeter street, but it's going to improve the overall street scene. We've placed the pocket park on the key intersection of Delaware and Powers, not just for our residents, but for all surrounding residents to be able to both visually and physically access. We've pulled the green courts. It was interesting that you had mentioned that all the way through the site. So each home has a pedestrian green court out their front door that connects to the perimeter streets. We've created small clusters of homes. Usually they're in a 6-pack to provide kind of intimate living environments that gives people more of an opportunity to get to know their neighbor. This will be a fully maintained landscape space. The HOA will ensure upkeep. All the alleys and the roads internal to the community will be private and therefore maintained by the HOA and not an added cost to the city. This is the open space diagram where we're illustrating we've actually exceeded the 50% open space. The lighter green is all the common area and the darker green is on lot. This is a comparison of how the concept has changed since you've seen the P4 concept. The P4 concept illustrated 99 units. We now have 85, which is a drop of 14 units in the whole process. The lot sizes during the P4 process were 26 by 50. We currently have 30 by 48. The 50-foot is still there. It's just included in the Denver water easement, so the length actually is the same. The open space still maintains the 50% open space. We're actually about 51. The park location previously was internal, kind of self-serving, where now it's external, which has really improved both access and visibility. The parking maintains, 2 per unit. Initial P4, we had illustrated 24 guest parking. We're now at about 51 guest parking internal, and we're not counting any on-street guest parking spaces towards this neighborhood. The building height has maintained at 35 and 45. The 35, again, is to the main structure, and the 45 goes up to the stair tower to allow for that opportunity for the rooftop terraces. The perimeter street comments came in from several conversations at the P4 process. We have created the development standards with Andrea to improve those elevations that side onto public right-of-ways and alleys. The P4 plan on Delaware, as you had mentioned, had 13 front elevations and 2 sides. Our current plan has 16 sides with the committed enhanced elevations. The Powers elevation had 18 fronts and 2 sides. Currently, with the wider lots, we have 10-foot fronts, 1 side, and 6 lots are pushed back because of the pocket park. We truly believe this is a benefit, that the rezone actually will provide strong investment into the neighborhood. We believe that that this will provide a very unique for-sale product that is not offered. We believe that the property, although has good access and proximity to the existing commercial and retail area, that this property really lacks a marketing window from Broadway that most businesses really desire. We believe that the lack of commercial and industrial interest in this property really does call for what the appropriate use would be. Several projects in the area have provided this lift analysis where Midtown in Adams County is a good example, Lowry Boulevard 1 in Denver, the Observatory Heights in Denver, and Ironworks in Inglewood. All redevelopments that offer increased home values, increased income levels, and even test scores to surrounding neighborhoods. We believe that this will attract higher income residents with improved shopping power, provides opportunity for housing diversity that maybe isn't considered today, offers home ownership, which often brings greater investment in maintenance as well as safety. And we believe the 50% open space will really be a community amenity. Here's just a little better, maybe, lot diagram that Andrea and I had discussed, illustrating that the main lot size is the 30 by 48. You can see in the alley, is there a pointer? Anyway, so at the top right, you can see where the alley access is. The 4-foot rear setback is excluded from the 8-foot entire apron, if that makes any sense, because the first 4 is in the Denver water easement, the next 4 was within the lot. The building envelope then is indicated in yellow. Often these homes are built end to end to the building envelope, and if they're built 1 inch off or the other, it just doesn't fit in the field as well. So we're giving ourselves some buffer. That is where the 3-foot side setbacks are actually 4-foot side setbacks based on the product side. So we have the ability to shift one way or the other and still be within those 3-foot side setbacks. That was what Andrea had mentioned earlier. Possible buyers, as mentioned, first-time buyers, young professionals, single parents, and active adults. The unit square footage will be 1,750. The architectural character really is an urban aesthetic with a combination of materials, as mentioned earlier. The front elevation will have a minimum of 40% masonry, and 40% of the units will include brick. The front facades will greet the street, and garages are all placed in the rear. This will be low-maintenance, single-family. Outdoor spaces beyond the 50% open space that we've already committed to will occur on patios, balconies, and the optional rooftop terraces. Enhanced side elevations facing both public and side alleyways will also encourage an improved street scene. The interiors are also very amazing. They're very dynamic spaces. The second floor is your main living environment, and it gains light on both sides, which makes a very active environment. First floor is garage and entry foyer, second floor kitchen, living space, and third floor bedrooms. We're really thrilled that this plan has evolved as far as it has over the last year and a half. It's been a long process. We really want to thank you for your time. We have lots of questions I know to answer that you guys all brought up, but we just wanted to say thank you, and we really encourage you to approve this GPD tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. You might stay here. We have questions.
Great.
Dan, we'll start with you.
Thank you for your presentation. Could you describe for me what the character of the, I guess the detention pond is on the north side? What is that? How will that be landscaped, or what's?
It'll be with native grasses. We'll definitely have a perimeter landscape of trees and shrubs. We have a DG trail that walks around, so you can walk your dog. It's not necessarily a dog park, but it's a great area to take your dog.
And that will be open and available to nearby residences to use as well?
Absolutely. All the common area will be available.
And then I noticed in the illustrative, there was looked like maybe it's noted here, it looks like there's a shade structure in the park.
Correct.
Okay. That's all I have.
Thanks, okay. Following up on that question about the detention pond, so native grass, is this really not a usable park space then?
It's definitely not an enhanced park. That is the park down on Delaware and Powers.
Okay.
This is native grass. It's more natural environment. It's not where you're going to go play Frisbee. It's going to be where you walk your dog in a loop environment.
Okay. And I read some mention in the narrative about a children's play area. I don't see it on the plan. Is that part of the pocket park?
It is, correct. There's a little play structure and a shade structure planned.
So it's in the proximity of what looks like a shade structure?
Correct.
Okay. Let's see. I notice a lot of the density of the units require a lot of small landscaped areas between the units in the fronts and the backs. And I wonder if the limitations on irrigating those tiny spaces has been considered. And I also have a question, is this similar, or are there any changes from what's been built at Littleton Village?
This is quite different than Littleton Village, and I actually brought the elevations, the setbacks in the process for Littleton Village, because I had a feeling that might come up. So although our lot sizes are about the same, they're both 1,500. That was where is this? So this is the Littleton Village site plan. It's actually allowed at 18 DUs per acre. We're at 10. We have 50% open space. There's very little open space in this core concept. The setbacks, although the yellow line has come off, the very top level is P, if anybody can read that. The front setbacks are 4. The side setbacks are 0. Side on a corner is 10. And the rear setbacks are 3. Our rear setbacks are 8. Our side setbacks are 3. Our front setbacks are 1. But we have common open space in front of every home, where Littleton Village did not. We have larger wide side setbacks on our alleys. So if you just compare the two drawings from Littleton Village to ours, it's the 50% open space. It's the smaller cluster courts. We've got like 6-packs everywhere where you only walk by 1 or 2 homes. That middle courtyard, you have to walk by 6 homes to get to that front door. So it's a completely different layout as well.
The reason I ask is I went by Littleton Village to see how that has come out. And they're beautiful units, but the density is pretty extreme. There's not as many units there, and they're also blended with townhomes and other types of products nearby.
True.
Concern about so many of the same type of unit here. Let's see.
And I think that's where the different clusters, the side elevations and the front elevations are going to make it feel a little different. Bannock, you're going to have front doors. Delaware, you're going to have fronts and some sides. And then, I'm sorry, Delaware, you have all sides. Powers, you have fronts and sides. And then as you get into the internal street, which again is private, you'll have a lot of small clusters, and if you just squint and look at the open space on this plan versus the Littleton Village plan, you have a lot more side conditions because we have smaller courts.
Okay, great. Let's see. I think that's all the questions I have at the moment. Oh, did you answer the question about price point and?
I'm going to let Jason answer the question on price point.
Hi there. I'm going to answer that question about price point, but I'm going to do it with a long disclaimer first, and I hope you'll bear with me.
Okay.
I'm always reluctant to commit to pricing for a variety of reasons, and I think you can probably understand why. This process began in February of 2018. Here we are in October of 2019, and we are at the zoning level where we're talking about allowable uses and setbacks and so forth. From here, we'll still have to work with the engineering department to figure out all the specifications for the land development and so forth. With all that said, we can imagine, say, in 2 years' time, it's difficult to imagine what the price of a gallon of gasoline would be, let alone timber or trades and so forth. What I can tell you is this. At our last pass of our forecast, we were planning to have the lowest price home base priced from $451,000. And I have pulled from two separate sources today some comparables that I think are very relevant for this discussion. Within a 1 mile radius of this property, when we look at all resales in the past 12 months, and this is according to resales of record as provided by Metro Study, within a 1 mile radius in the past 12 months, the average resale home was $459,000. So our base price is lower than the average resale. And I would also add that that average resale was built in 1958. That means it's a 60-year-old home, probably with aluminum wiring and asbestos, maybe dated finishes, maybe low ceilings, an older floor plan that has maybe smaller rooms. There could be a variety of reasons why a buyer might find greater value proposition in the new home versus that 60-year-old home. Maybe they don't. The purpose of housing diversity, though, is to offer something to everybody. The home doesn't have to be perfect for everyone, it just has to be perfect for someone. When we look at new homes, we looked at a 1 mile radius in the past 12 months and we found none. And so we opened up our criteria and we found in a 3 mile radius in about a year and a half, there were something like 65 new homes. And the average price of one of those new homes, $647,500. So our base pricing is $200,000 less than that average new home within that very wide radius where you can find one. I don't know what that number is offhand, but maybe 40% less. So, there's a lot of discussion to be had about what today's housing really, what attainable means, what achievable means. I don't hold this project up as sort of a silver bullet of solving the high cost of housing, but I think that it's helping to work to that solution.
Okay, thank you.
David?
Have you guys had an appraisal done on the property for any purpose? Or any report done by an appraiser?
I'm not sure that we've had any appraisal per se. Is there something you're looking for specifically?
Highest, best use?
Highest, best use? Well, it's a good question. I don't know how to tackle that one best. I think that we have a commercial broker in the audience that might be better attuned to kind of answering that when he speaks, so maybe you can ask. But if highest and best use is measured by your previous question about the property tax revenue, I would just encourage city staff to maybe challenge the assumption a few minutes ago that, that unimproved industrial is a higher and better use than improved residential. And I say this because I was looking up the property taxes paid on the property last year, and unless I'm mistaken, I think they were $45,000 total. And if we assume that a single home is somewhere on the order of $2,000, maybe $2,500 a year in property taxes, I think the current property tax revenue is probably equivalent to something like 15 to 20 homes, and this development is 85. As long as I'm on this tangent here, if you'll give me just a little bit of a leeway, my colleague Susan mentioned that all of the streets internal are private. And so the conventional wisdom that residential is a money loser in terms of property taxes, I think deserves a little bit more analysis here because we are not adding any additional public streets. In fact, the public streets are existing, so we are adding additional property tax revenue to support the same number of public streets that exist today. So I don't know that I can answer your question exactly, but I think that there's a real multifaceted answer there.
Okay, well, yeah, I appreciate your answer. And just to be clear, highest and best use is something that an appraiser would tell you. So if you haven't done an appraiser then, or appraisal, then that you wouldn't have that. My other question is on the HOA. Exactly what does the HOA maintain? Do they maintain all of the landscaping? Do they maintain the exterior of the property, the roof, anything like that?
Good question, and I think Commissioner Stallman had a similar question earlier on. The homeowners association here would not maintain the exterior of the homes, but would maintain all exterior landscaping. So any landscaping that's maybe street trees along the perimeter of the community, any landscaping in greenbelt in front of the community, in front of the rows of homes, the private streets, the pocket park with that shade structure and play feature, the detention pond. I think that that pretty well encompasses the breadth of the homeowners association's responsibilities. Maybe also design review and covenant enforcement if somebody wanted to make an exterior change to their home.
Okay, so it's not on the lot of the homeowner that they're maintaining?
Actually, it is. The homeowner, by virtue of the covenants that will be created for this community, will be granting an easement to the homeowners association to access the any private lot that is not covered by the building. So that would mean that if there's any landscaping located on the private lot, the HOA would still have the ability and the mandate to maintain that landscaping. And that's by design, because we don't want homeowners with a lock and leave lifestyle to have a lawnmower for some reason, or to have to water just a handful of shrubs, or to have, a sprinkler system that has to get blown out just for, a few tall grasses or something. The landscape maintenance, to put it in another way, the landscape maintenance that I would expect a homeowner to do is watering any pots of flowers on their front porch or on their rooftop terrace.
Okay, so it's not a question of the HOA coming onto a property if they're not maintaining it, they're just maintaining all open areas.
That's correct, and we think that's a benefit for the homeowner, and we'll sort of posture all of our information to the buyer to express it that way so there's no surprise.
Okay, but the homeowner owns the lot, they own the land.
That's correct.
Under the building and all that. Okay.
And I don't know that we touched on this before, but I think it's worth pointing out that these are not for rent, these are for sale homes.
Mm-hmm. Right, okay.
Just to follow up, walls, windows, roofs, that's the individual owner's responsibility.
That's right, yeah, and there are various reasons for that, and we can kind of go through it if you want.
No, that's just a question. You answered it. Thank you. Sherry?
I think most of my questions were answered. However, on the homeowners association in the exterior, since this, the design is more, it is single family, but it looks more like a multifamily housing development. Would you see then that the architectural controls for the exteriors would be in the homeowners association? Because for a development like this, the exterior consistency seems to be more important than maybe some other types of development.
Yeah, so the homeowners association will have the power to approve any exterior changes to the home. We do that to maintain the aesthetics of the community over time, and it also gives the homeowners association some teeth if a homeowner fails to, paint their siding over time, and it becomes it gives it kind of that distressed look. So the homeowners association will do that covenant control to make sure that everything is maintained to a high level. Now, in practice, unlike a suburban community where somebody might want to put in a shed in their backyard, there's going to be very little in the way of exterior changes to the homes because there's not much lot to make any changes. A change that might go through a design review committee in all practical terms might be changing the color of blinds and windows or something that has a view from the outside. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you. Also, since you showed us the difference between the Littleton Village product and this product, and obviously there are similarities, however, are all the units in Littleton Village that are of this design built out? Or will there be more product similar to this at Littleton Village or at another location nearby?
Good question. Littleton Village was built out. I think that there are some commercial pads maybe in Littleton Village, but Richmond American Homes doesn't have any part in those. So our Cityscapes community in Littleton Village is complete. We do not have any other properties in Littleton at this time.
Okay, and then are all the units at Littleton Village, they initially sold then?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. One more question about the utilities. Earlier in the packet, there was a letter earlier that stated that burying under the utilities was being explored, and then later in the staff presentation or report and presentation, it did say that they would be buried on the two main corridors. Is that certain then that those will be buried?
That's correct. Our intention, if we're able to move forward with this property, is that we will bury those power lines there. There are, I think, 2 poles that will remain above ground because they are servicing existing apartments across the street. We felt like it was not right for us to try to enter someone else's structure to make physical changes to their own building. So we will be undergrounding everything to the point where if at some point the 2 structures that are still served by those 2 particular poles, it was 2, right? Yeah. Those 2 poles, if at some point they're not being used, then they can be removed.
Okay. That's all I have. Thank you.
Jason?
Sure. Thank you for the presentation. I think you had mentioned Lowry Boulevard 1, and one feature, if I recall correctly, from that area is that the end cap units actually have entries onto the public streets as opposed to, say, on Delaware here where it's kind of proposed to have a side elevation. Is there any consideration given to actually wrapping a front porch or, alternating the entry on the end caps on Delaware in particular?
I don't think so at this time. I think the idea that we went from the 13 front elevations where I think everyone said it looks like one big long attached building to the side corridors with our extended green courts. And one other thing I forgot to mention, the green courts vary anywhere from 25 feet lot line to lot line to 35 feet lot line to lot line. So those are pretty impressive green corridors that are going to be cutting through the site. That doesn't answer your question on the front doors, but that would be probably a major change when the majority of the one side of the building is a garage, right? And then the other one has a front door. Do you want to answer that if you change your front doors?
Excuse me. It's an interesting idea, and to be quite honest with you, I'm not sure the idea had come up internally. It's something that we can explore. Obviously, I'm hesitant to make any commitment here because there may be other things in play, like fire rating on what would otherwise be the side of the home. But it's certainly something that I'll bring back to my team to discuss.
The other question had to do with the landscaping and the tree lawns that someone else brought up earlier. I think the concept is that the underground utilities are going to go in the public right-of-way. What's preventing just, say, using the front yard as a 15-foot utility easement for dry utilities and then putting the trees out in the street?
And I'm going to let Mark Saval, the civil engineer, answer that question.
Yeah, exactly. My name is Mark Saval. I'm also with Redland, 1500 West Canal Court in Littleton. Yeah, we're obviously very preliminarily talking with Excel about what it's going to take to put those power lines underground. So I think the idea is that they're currently in the right-of-way, and that's where they'll go. Obviously, you know, as we get, if this moves forward and we get into final design, we can certainly work with them to figure out where the best place for that is. Obviously, we don't want them on private lots, so we'll have to either be in the common area or the city right-of-way. But obviously, this is an illustrative plan. A lot of these details still need to be figured out.
Thank you. That's it.
Bruce?
I've got 3 here. The pictures of the interior that you showed were, yeah, I mean, it's impressive. On the other hand, there's a lot of stairs there, and I guess I'm curious, you know, if somebody's got a disability and is unable to get upstairs, or a senior, what accommodations might be made, and B, is there any sort of product that has maybe an elevator in it that would allow greater accessibility?
I don't believe that we have elevators, so I don't think that's the option. Jason, how have you dealt with this in the past?
You know, I think that, you know, equal housing opportunity is important. I think that any accommodations are a case-by-case basis. This being fully detached, it doesn't fall under multifamily standards, and so there are no specific requirements. But again, I think it's something that we would try to work with the homeowner on a case-by-case basis.
Okay, all right. And one of the other questions, I hadn't heard anybody address it, was the issue of ground contamination testing given proximity to an industrial site, an existing industrial site.
That's right. I actually owe you 2 answers. I just thought of another one that you asked earlier. There are no recognized environmental conditions on this property. We have done an environmental site assessment, and that was the conclusion from our professional environmental consultant.
Okay. All right.
The other question that you asked earlier, if you wouldn't mind, you asked about a metro district.
Yeah.
In my experience, I don't want to make any promises for you here, but I think that you are right that this site is probably too small to make a metro district worthwhile in terms of formation and all of the costs and things that go into that. And then when it was created, I don't know how marketable it would be since it's such a small community. So my expectation today is that there probably would not be a metro district. Not impossible, unlikely.
Okay, that's fair. And the last question I have is, you had made the comment when you came up, and I respect the comment that you can't, 100% success on everything's not feasible given all the myriad of details that go into developing individual properties or a development, infill development as large as this. But you alluded to essentially no one works harder is more committed to satisfying the customer. So give us a little bit of flavor for how you practically address some of those kinds of issues.
Sure. Maybe I'll answer with kind of 2 parts of this. When I first got into home building, my boss, the woman that was kind of my mentor as I was getting into the business, she would always tell me that what we do in our industry is iterative, that there are so many things that we're working through. You know, unlike building a car, for example, where you're doing it in a dust-free environment, you know, in a controlled production line, you know, this is happening in real life, in real weather, in real seasons. And the important part in what we do is that we approach everything with the sort of mindset of making it better. And so when we develop this particular house product, and then we bring it to another community, and then we bring it to a community after that, each time that we go through that, whether it's working with the planning staff or working with Public Works or working with the building department, as we go, we find ways to make it better. And you know, Littleton Village is a great example of lessons learned, and some of those lessons are things as simple as how many homes in a row that we want, or how much space we want between the homes. So to answer your question, I think we show that commitment by continually improving, so that when you buy a Cityscapes home today, you're buying something that's improved even upon the Cityscapes that you could have bought a few years ago. I hope that that answers your question. In terms of just a mindset of quality, I have worked for other builders. I have been in the industry now a while, and I have had time to perceive, you know, what everyone sort of brings to the table. And one thing that is so appealing to me about Richmond is that we are still founder-led, and our founders are involved each and every day, and they take great pride in the homes that they build. They take great pride in the materials that we put on the homes. And I can say from being in the hallway, being in the office when these discussions are had, there are no compromises made in terms of the quality of the materials and the quality of finishes. And if a compromise comes up, then maybe that is not the community where we want to build. It shows itself sometimes in ways that can be frustrating. For example, it would be nice if we could offer these homes for less. You know, I can give you a specific example if you want, or I can just, you know, leave it at that, you know, the gentlemen that have started the company and are leading it through 40 plus years and 200,000 homes nationwide are taking great pride that each and every one of these homes are their homes.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah. So I had a couple of questions, and this is on your GPDP. Between page 1 and 2, there were some discrepancies I just wanted to clear up. So when you're looking on the chart, it says that the minimum lot is 1,300, but if you look at D2, it says 1,380. Just
We gave ourselves a little fluff. Sometimes lots get pinched in one corner or not another, so we went to a minimum of 1,300.
So that be maybe corrected on this so that there isn't the 2. And it's the same thing also for the parking. In one place says 0.6 on the chart, but when you go into F on page 2, it says 0.5. So which one?
We're at 0.6.
Okay, so you keep the 0.6. Okay. That's probably redundant, but it does say in here that the cost would be covered by a Metro or an HOA, though that's been covered, that most likely not Metro. So, when you're talking about the exterior materials, so I'm a little confused on so 40% of the homes will have brick. How much of those 40% will be brick? In the sense that you're talking like, so there's 40%, that 20% of those 40%, or?
Sure.
I mean,
so we've committed to 20% of the front elevation will be masonry.
So, but only a portion of that would necessarily be brick, because they can also be stone veneer or tile veneer.
Correct. So of the 85 units, 40% of them will have the brick veneer on the front at 20%.
Okay, that kind of shrinks it down continually within 20 to 40. Also, it was discussed about how stucco being considered a masonry material seems doubtful. What's the consensus on that?
So in the industry, stucco is considered a masonry material. Some municipalities sometimes disagree.
Yeah, I was going to say that exact thing, that in the majority of the municipalities where we work, stucco is considered a form of masonry. I would defer to Michael Sutherland. I know that he's worked in other municipalities. I would assume he's had a similar experience. I don't want to speak for him, but, if that's a point of contention, I don't think that stucco needs to be a form of masonry here. We were just taking what we considered to be the majority approach.
You can guess what I'm going to ask you guys.
I knew I'd have to get up here and speak eventually. I'm Mike Sutherland. I'm the Deputy Director of Community Development. Different municipalities, as Mr. Pock had mentioned, consider stucco differently. There is EIFS, which is Exterior Insulation Finishing System, which is often referred to as synthetic stucco. That is most often targeted by other municipalities as being not considered masonry. Real stucco, which is a cementatious finish, is often considered to be masonry in character.
And that's true for Littleton?
Littleton, I don't think we've got I don't think we've got any determination on that as to whether we consider that to be the variations. We don't have any determination as to we don't have a minimum masonry requirement in the first place. So what's considered masonry is sort of not even part of that factor, I guess.
So based on this, stucco would be considered masonry because that's in the GDPD. Okay.
Yes.
I'll let you deal with that if you want to.
Voted for Bayer?
No? So under K, Site Design Standards 15, says where possible, shrubs and trees will be located to screen utility boxes and air conditioning condensers from public streets. But if you look at our present landscaping 10-5-7 F1, utility boxes shall be screened. So I'm a little concerned about the where possible versus shall.
So we can clean that up as well, but utility boxes need to be clear for access in certain locations. So it depends on where the utility box is located, and if we, can screen based on its access, if there's room to screen. So it's really, we do our best to screen utility boxes, but utilities also have their minimum setbacks and their landscape requirements and their accessibility.
I see someone else approaching.
Yeah.
I think her answer is a good one. I would also add that our interests are aligned, that we want to screen the view of utility boxes as well to create the high aesthetics of the community. For us, it's just sort of a limiting factor of what the utility provider is comfortable with and what is reasonable for future maintenance.
Well, my concern is if this was actually being built under our present landscaping, it says shall. That's what I mean by the 10-5-7 F1. It does say shall. Of course, you don't have to follow that. You're doing your own thing here, but it just seems like we're lowering our standards with having a where possible versus our landscaping saying shall, and maybe you guys can clear it up if I misunderstand.
And I don't think that our intent was to lower the standards, and I think if that's a point of contention, we would be happy to concede it. I think it was more a matter of us reviewing and re-reviewing and thinking, are there iterations where it might not make sense to screen a particular utility box because of circumstances in the field, and we thought that there were. But again, I certainly don't want to see this project not able to move forward due to something like that, because I think we all want the same goal there.
Just one last for clarification, where you talked about the overhead utility lines. On your page 2, it's basically Powers and Bannock. Thank you.
Yes. They're only on Powers and Bannock.
Speak.
The utility overhead power lines are only on Powers and Bannock.
I just wanted to clarify the street names because there had been some discussion about apartments and not, and why. but not saying specifics like that. That's all. Thank you very much.
And I think that's maybe my fault if I muddled that. Our intent is to underground all of those power lines. I just want to manage expectations that there will be 2 poles that will remain above ground in addition to the underground to provide service to those older apartment buildings that are located across the street.
Yeah, they probably wouldn't like it if you removed them and they didn't have service.
I think you're right. I think they're probably pretty comfortable with the electricity that they've got.
Thank you.
Okay. Question about the stair towers. When you have 2 units that are separated by 6 feet, are the towers, is one in the front and one in the back? How are you undulating those towers? Point being, if all the towers are in the front, that 6-foot gap gets even narrower and narrower, very, gets slivery, let's call it. What's your intent on the towers?
That's a good question. I'm not sure that I'd really thought that through. I think if that's something that's important to you, I think with some pre-planning, we could probably figure out where the stair towers would go.
Some of your elevations do show them towards the rear. I would say try to, don't put them side by side in the front. One would be in the front, the next one would be in the rear. And then undulate it would be.
That certainly makes sense. Point noted. I don't know the house plans well enough to tell you which ones are which, but I think that's certainly a request we can take back to the team.
Okay.
Excuse me. The elevation we just put up has 2 towers towards the front, on the right side, and I don't think that is alarming in terms of having those 2 components parallel to each other. So, but I do think some of them are pushed back.
Not that every one has to be, separated, but make it a general rule would be good.
Got it.
Any fencing at the perimeter of any kind?
No, right now we have no fencing. We have landscape screening on the side of Norgren. Norgren's fence will remain.
You might consider fencing if, in the play area there, if you had children, it might be nice to have a 3-foot high fence or something like that for safety purposes. A ball goes out in the street or something. Minor item. Not minor, but your child.
Yes, understood.
Okay. Let's see. You answered the question about, what are you doing with this facades that are facing streets, whether it be internal streets or the exterior streets? Architects all the time talk about 4-sided architecture, or if you're talking about the roof, it'd be 5-sided architecture.
Correct.
Here, quite frankly, you have 1-sided architecture as a gentle criticism of your facades. On those end units, I know you have the minimum standards. You might seriously consider upgrading them beyond the minimums. You'll have a better sale product and look a hell of a lot better in the community. I asked about the along Powers. You have 4 units and a gap, 4 units a gap, and then you have the 2 units. The gaps are very important to me. You can obviously tell there's amendment brewing here. The gaps line up nicely with the interior courtyards of the buildings to the north. So you've got a sidewalk there you can walk through. What is that gap? What is the minimum gap you will live with?
Some of them, the minimum right now is 25.
I'm sorry?
The minimum gap is 25. And you're talking the pedestrian corridors, right?
Yes, between units, what is it? Hard to read here. 77 and 78 and 81 and 82.
Okay, I was using the 25 for the green courts up north. Those I'll have to go back and dimension those. But I believe they're about 20 feet.
Okay.
Maybe 15 or 20.
Like 15, 16 feet. I need a number shortly.
Yep. I have a full-size plan here. Let me go dimension it.
Okay. Because again, if you've solved the problem with just that blank, house 6 feet, house 6 feet all along Delaware, you got to consider it here. I don't want to leave it nebulous that you may or may not, since this is illustrative, you may or may not do the gaps. To me, the gaps are important. Just as important as what you've done on Delaware.
Great.
That's it. Any other questions?
I've got just 2 other ones.
Sure, go ahead.
I guess in the P4 plan, the units on Delaware were all facing the street, were engaging the street. And you make reference in some of your narratives that the units have front door architecture. And I understand there's some end units along Powers, but the majority of the units along Delaware are now side elevations and not engaging the street. And I was just wondering what the reasoning for that was.
Well, a couple reasons. One, the comment on the P4 was, if you see the plan on the upper portion of the slide, where we had 13 front doors, right? And someone had said that that looks too long as an attached product, even though we know it's all detached. So we looked at siding, side elevations, and creating those green courts and pulling them into the community. So we thought, instead of that wall of architecture kind of limiting both outside in and inside out, that those green courts connecting out to Delaware would be a positive.
I mean, you're basically doing that same pattern along Powers as it is. You've got gaps and clusters of 4. So I think we'll be discussing that. At least I will be discussing that as far as maybe repeating that character. And I've got some reasons why I think that's consistent with the Progress Park neighborhood. The other question I had is I know it looks like, I was just on the Richmond Homes website, it looks like you guys do a duplex product. Is that typically a different price point than a single family? Is it more or less?
Yes, we do have in what we call the urban collection, a paired home. It's a smaller home and a lower price point. In terms of product selection for particular area, there's various factors that go into it. Sometimes it's the value of the land. Sometimes it's the value of the improvements that need to be done to the land. Sometimes it's the yield of the homes that we'll be able to put into. But it's sort of a layering process of what we think we can build in order to deliver homes at a certain price and whether those homes will sell. In this particular case, we did look at the urban collection, but it didn't seem appropriate for various reasons.
So it's not penciling. I mean, if you were to have the same amount of units, but some of them were duplexes, you would. Where I'm drilling into is that you would give probably a better quality of open space, right? Instead of a 6-foot gap, you'd bring it together and maybe you make 2 12-foot gaps.
I think that you're making a very valid point that if we were able to bring in that different product, that maybe we could do some more things with variation with the layout and so forth. No, the product didn't pencil, and we also have to be mindful of creating enough product to create sort of a critical mass that supports us having a model home or multiple model homes with the sales office. And this is not a very large community to begin with. And so if we split it into 2 product lines, besides just the economics of it, then it becomes difficult for us to make the additional model complex worthwhile. So various factors going into it. All I can tell you in this particular case, though, is that we just weren't able to make it work here.
Okay. Any other questions?
Yeah, I got one more.
But I'm sorry, you wanted to
I wanted to answer your question about the gap.
Sorry.
No worries.
The minimum width is 15 feet, lot line to lot line. Then you'd have a 3-foot side setback on each lot. So that is our minimum gap.
So we're talking basically 15 feet between property lines.
Between property lines.
Okay, plus
3 and 3.
Plus the 3 and
So
3. That's reasonable. Okay.
21.
I'm sorry, one more question.
Yeah, this may be just a curiosity. I don't know that it's 100% relevant, but do your, as a rule, do your HOA covenants, initially at least, make reference to short-term rentals, either prohibiting them or not?
Yeah, we have, over several years now, we have been putting a provision into our covenants, our just sort of standard form template that we use in all of our communities. We've been including some language that there are no short-term rentals less than 6 months, and that those rentals have to be pursuant to a written lease. We started doing that because We were perceiving from some of our homeowners in certain communities that they were feeling like homes around them were getting purchased as investment only, and we decided that wasn't the climate that we wanted to make in our neighborhood. Do you have any feelings about that either way?
Well, I guess my only feeling is that in this community, it doesn't seem like there's a lot of room for extra cars. And a lot of times in short-term rentals, you've got more than one potentially. Sure. And so you could have a higher density in that case.
Well, our standard posture here is to not allow the short-term rentals. So I think that we're on the same page there.
Thanks.
And Robin?
So I was looking at your illustrative image here, and it's dotted with lots of lovely trees around the perimeter, but when I actually read your wording, it's every 40 feet. This doesn't look like every 40 feet. This looks a lot more, particularly on Bannock and Delaware. Well, all of them, they look like there's a lot more trees shown here than 40, and it seems a little deceptive.
Those are about 40 feet. You know, the typical street tree is between 35 and 40 feet in terms of its canopy and shade, depending on that tree element.
So if I'm looking at a lot that the house might be
30 feet.
So actually something in what Andrea, in one of your things, it said that the houses would be about 24 feet in width. But that sounds different than what you're saying.
No, the unit's 24, the 30-foot is lot.
Yeah.
So the
So
40-foot on center doesn't necessarily need to be all exact 40 feet on center. That's the number of trees that will occur on that string. So as you can see, 3 of them are clustered, then there's an opening, then 3 are clustered, then there's an opening. So it averages out to be 40 on 40 foot.
It looks a little tighter than that when I try to calculate it, but okay, I'll go with that.
Here again, I want to say there was no sleight of hand intended. We went with 40 foot on center because in our experience, that tends to be a pretty standard approach for determining the number of and spacing of street trees. You know, if this is particularly important to you, there's certainly flexibility there.
No, it's not that. It's just looking at the 40 feet and then trying to count if that's 30, that's 30, that's 30. There's a tree. It's like 3 trees and 90 feet, and that was all. It just looked like there was a little more treeage there than what was said here, that's all.
Hopefully the eyes don't glaze over. I've got one more question here. Along Powers, you're widening the street on the north side of Powers, is that correct?
Correct.
So that the parking will be further away from the center line of the street, is that correct?
Correct. We're building it to the city standard. Currently, it's not built to the city standard.
I see, okay. In your previous submittal, you were kind of counting those parking spaces along Powers. If you drive there at any time, you notice that every evening they are chock full of people obviously living on the south side of Powers.
Correct. So we heard that at the P4 as well as the neighborhood meeting. So we do not count any of the perimeter parking. Now, that doesn't limit our residents from parking there, but we don't count it towards our 0.6 guest per unit.
Is there parking allowed on Delaware on the east side?
Correct.
It is allowable parking there.
There is allowable parking there.
Okay.
We're just not counting it.
All right. Anything else, commissioners? We're going to take a chair's whim here. We're going to take a 10-minute break. So we will see you all at 10 minutes sharp, and then we'll get into public comment and then motions, et cetera. Okay. 10-minute break.
All right,
Smoke
good call.
I was in this damn seat for 2.5 hours, 3 hours. It's great just to sit here 5 hours straight here.
Okay, well, this is good. Go to the bathroom.
Opening it up to public comment. We have two speakers. You'll have that signed up. If you haven't signed up and you wish to speak afterwards, we'll ask you. You'll have 3 minutes to speak. Again, when your 30 seconds are up, the 30 seconds left, I should say, the yellow card will be held up. And when your 3 minutes are up, the red card will be held up. We ask that you be civil. First up is Maggie Andrews.
Good evening, and thank you for having me. My name is Maggie Andrews, Maggie with a Y. I live at 554 East Hinsdale Avenue here in Littleton, where I was born and raised. And I'm excited to support the application for Richmond American Homes this evening. I am a very happy Cityscape homeowner. I purchased the home about 3 years ago, in December of 2016. I was in my mid-20s and a single woman. Now I know what you're probably thinking, that's a big purchase for a single individual. And yes, it was a little intimidating and scary to purchase a home by myself. I was a little unsure of the housing market. It's expensive to live in Denver, but it's also expensive to rent in Denver. And while my money can be spent in many ways, I wanted to use it to leverage a financial future. So I decided to invest in equity. And I purchased a home knowing that if something happened with my career, if there was some kind of setback, I could bring in an additional renter. And these homes allow for that in a lot of ways because of their urban lifestyle and great location. I knew there were many employment centers close to the area that would offer space for a tenant. And they offer a low maintenance lifestyle that's very appealing to a young homeowner who wants to go do activities on the weekend, not manage a lawn. Anyways, 3 years later, I now have built a great deal of equity in my house, and I'm really proud of that. I've also since gotten married, and this setup is wonderful for a 2-income household. We can continue to plan for our long-term financial future, but also have equity in our house and take a few vacations here and there too. We are also maybe what you would call that baby maybe demographic. We're considering having kids in the next few years. And while this house I think would work really well for a small child, I think it would be a little bit harder for a larger family or maybe even a toddler running around, if you can imagine the baby gates. So I think we probably would move up into a larger single-family home over time, maybe with a little bit more of a yard and fewer stairs. But I don't think that would be possible with this without the initial first step of owning a home in the first place. While this may seem like a relatively higher priced first starter home, it has built great equity very quickly, especially having it be a new home. The resale value is very strong. And I think that equity is going to set us up really well for the future. And it's much needed in the Littleton community to see improved land and housing that's relatively affordable for young working individuals. Thank you.
Thank you. Pam Chadbourne?
I'm still Pam Chadbourne and live in a block and a half from here, so I object to this project fundamentally, and I would like you to reject it flat. The reason why is that your job here is not to consider the current market or what people want right now, but the next 40 to 60 years. And I'm going to tell you that I don't think these will hold value beyond 20 years. They will not hold beyond 2 or 3 market cycles. They are energy inefficient. They are all alike. Good point, Chair Rednicki. They're all next to each other, side by side. I have seen developments in which the houses are at least at an angle to each other so that you don't look out and look into someone's window. At least they're at an angle and you don't see the window to window to window. These are tall stacks, and they are inappropriate for people who are older and for people who have young kids. They are not diverse. These are not diverse housing. And this is one of the first things you learn when you talk about residences in communities. They should not all be alike altogether. It is a fundamental mistake, which we learned at least 60 years ago, if not earlier. You should never put housing like this, which is all alike altogether. This is the blight of the future. It will not hold value. It is not energy efficient, and I guarantee that within the next few decades, there will be energy challenges that these will not stand up to. So these should be categorically disallowed. Also, by the way, there are these stacks all around us. Thanks to you folks, because you changed the zoning for these infills. And they're ugly. I visited one and they're horrible, this vertical stack. So they exist here, they exist in Littleton Village, and again, you guys rezoned the Plat 56. They're stacks too. There's stacks all over. We should have a limit on these things, and we should not put any more in the city. If this existed too, there maybe should be some stacks and some houses. This is an awful development for a community. Also, by the way, it's supposed to be near Broadway for transit, so it should be accessible for people who have handicaps and need to use transit. I don't have time to talk about everything, but taxes. So you've got to consider the fire, police, schools, parks, streets. Just because they have internal streets doesn't mean they're not going to cost the city money. Overall, residences cost more than the services cost more than what the residences bring in. This is a loss to the city economically. You should listen to the financial analysis and reject it fundamentally. It doesn't belong in Littleton. Thank you.
Is there anyone else that, anyone that hasn't signed up that wishes to speak? Please, give your name and address, please.
My name is Mike Kabuti. It's K, B as in boy, O-U, D as in dog, I. 1401 Lawrence Street, Suite 1100, Denver, Colorado, 80202. I'm with Cushman & Wakefield. I'm a executive director, and I manage our land group over there. Cushman & Wakefield, for those of you that don't know, is the largest commercial group in Denver. We have about 75 brokers. Over the last 20 years, we've done the majority of the land deals within the Colorado market. And so I've been the top land broker voted on by NAIOP for 7 of the last 10 years. So I've done a few of these before. So thank you for listening to me. I really appreciate it. The way that I'd like to talk about this is twofold. First, I'm going to talk about the positives of the project just from an overall perspective, and then I will talk about the site as a commercial potential site moving forward. What's being proposed is an alternative to all of the expensive houses that are currently being built in the market right now. It's important to reward the builders like Richmond that actually understand that there's a problem and are trying to solve for this problem by creating new products that will address the affordability crisis. This proposal will bring a strong investment into an area that has been stagnant for decades. There will be an energy creation, a new streetscape, an incentive for other property owners to invest in their own properties. The development mirrors many other successful infill developments like we've talked about in this session across the market that have activated their areas in numerous different jurisdictions. There is an intense amount of demand to live in Littleton, and this project will be a great place to live. Conversely, I spoke with our industrial and commercial land groups at a meeting to find out about the viability of industrial on the site. Their response was that there was no visibility, no marketing window, and that businesses want compatible uses nearby. This feels like it's in a housing neighborhood was their typical response. The market told us the same thing as it has been vacant and on the market for years. This property has been listed over the last 10 years. It was listed by Fuller & Company and has been on the market for years, okay? Just to refute that it has only been on the market since 2017. It was listed by Craig and R.C. Miles over at Fuller & Company. So that's there. The argument then becomes, what about potential revenue loss? It's potential. Vacant ground brings in nothing but taxes, small taxes for vacant ground. And the market has told us that users aren't there. Even in what has been a historical boom in our city, they haven't showed up to develop this site as industrial. So trying to predict future commercial revenue is impossible to do. Keeping this ground vacant actually prohibits more residents from using the great retail and commercial that exists in the area. So to sum up, this is a great project on its own standing, but the fact that the current zoning can't be utilized by the market makes it an even better use for the property. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Seeing nothing, we'll close the public comment portion of our hearing. Would the applicant like to make any last comments?
I would like to answer one of the questions that came earlier in your conversation about the percentage of open space that detention makes up. Sorry, I forgot that earlier. It covers about 21% of the overall 4.5 acres of open space. Does that answer your question?
Well, Yes.
I had a question for the applicant, a follow-up question. Was brought up during the public testimony, concerns about the energy efficiency of these units. Could you talk to, R values and how energy efficient the units are intended to be?
I wish that I could. I'm not a vertical construction expert. What I can tell you, though, is that we're adhering, or we will be adhering to the current building code adopted by City of Littleton, which I think is, building codes become more and more rigorous every few years. Compared to that existing resale housing stock that we discussed, of the 1959 vintage, I think that these are far more energy efficient, or will be. Again, I'm not a vertical construction expert.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have a motion? Motion man?
I move to approve PC Resolution 13-2019, approving the Delaware and Powers rezoning request, which forwards a favorable recommendation to City Council.
Second.
Second. We have the motion and a second. Discussion. We can go up and down the line again. Dan, you'd like to start it out?
Thanks, Chairman.
You want to be last?
I guess I am leaning towards supporting a rezone for a couple reasons. One, the parcel sort of just languished for numbers of years as industrial, and just has not moved. I also see it as being an appropriate sort of transitional parcel between commercial-oriented Broadway and into a residential neighborhood. I think it also meets the Progress neighborhood, or Progress Park neighborhood's goal number 2. It's on page 15 of the staff report that basically says requests to limit new high-density residential development as well as the encroachment of commercial and industrial development into existing residential areas. So it seems like this is supporting that desire from the Progress Park neighborhood. So one thing I can't quite get my head wrapped around yet is really basically some of the features of the proposed site plan, where I would like to have the applicant reconsider the unit orientation on Delaware. I guess I'm satisfied by I was kind of pushing at a different product type. Maybe that would perhaps increase some of the quality of the open space. The duplexes, for instance, could still have the same amount of units, maybe even a few more, I don't know, but it would maybe improve that sort of quality of open space. The building height, it's higher than what is allowed in some of the surrounding land use areas. So I'd love to hear some more discussion about that amongst the group, but I think 35 feet up to 45 feet, 45 feet seems high. I understand some of the units may not have those stair towers. I think that's what's kicking off that 45 feet. So I guess I look forward to any more discussion about that. Let's see what else. I think that's it for right now. Might come back with some more.
Great.
Okay. This one's a challenging one. I've been writing down the pros and cons as I listen to the various inputs here, and I think the cons are pretty substantial. I think the economic analysis is a big one that I have some concerns about. But even more so, I think the sort of what I would call a monoculture of product type, that it's a sort of a lack of diversity within the overall community. There, even though there's architectural diversity within the individual units, the size of the pads, the size of the lots, the size of the units are all very similar, and they're targeted at a certain demographic that's not completely diverse. We heard the concerns about aging in place, older people, people with families, and so on. It certainly appeals to a certain type of potential homeowner and entry levels, especially. And I think that's good for this neighborhood. So that's part of the pro also. The pro is that this could energize an area that has languished for a long time. I see the potential to really improve this neighborhood, not only internal to this community, but the street facing, the ability for the adjacent neighborhood to recognize some of the benefits of new sidewalks and landscaping and a street edge that's lacking there. And, you know, the idea that there is a better transition from residential to industrial there, this could be that buffer. I think it's very important that street edge be really focused on. I think there's some shortcomings in the current design. As I mentioned, the location of the street trees, I think with working with Excel, they could be brought on the other side of the sidewalk. And that streetscape really be very pedestrian friendly. So I frankly haven't decided yet. I'm kind of on the fence with this one. Pros and cons are equalizing, and I'd like to have more conversation among this group before I decide. That's it.
I look at the zoning surrounding this site and the Norgren site. You know, I can't help but it just looks like an island of industrial amongst a sea of residential properties. Of course, there's retail, maybe some office along Broadway and Littleton Boulevard, but you know, this is primarily a residential area, and so, you know, I can certainly sympathize with the fact that, you know, we would like to have more commercial in Littleton versus having more residential for a revenue standpoint, tax revenue standpoint. On the other hand, 85 homeowners and their guests and family members will definitely, you know, you can walk to Broadway, spend your money, or on Littleton Boulevard there. So the sales tax increase will be not insignificant. I just don't see this as a viable site for anything but residential. That's why I asked about the highest and best use. I feel like any appraiser would tell you that that's residential, unless Norgren was going to develop that site because they already own it. Even then, it just doesn't fit. The Norgren property doesn't really fit either. And I understand this is kind of built up over time, and it is what it is at this point, but just looking at the surrounding uses, just generally, I feel like residential is the best use for this site. You know, as far as the look of the property, I think the builder has gone to great lengths to try and appease the community, to appease surrounding neighbors. They certainly have a lot of open space in this area. I like the idea of having an option for people who don't want to have to maintain their yards to be able to I guess it's called lock and leave. So I generally support this project, and, you know, could it be better? Maybe. But I think, you know, someone else is going to do it differently, and it might be just as bad or worse if you know, if that's the language that somebody wants to use. But I think it looks pretty good. You know, there's maybe some issues with the height, but just given the fact that there's an industrial site next door, there's commercial very close, I think it is a good transition from the commercial and multifamily uses to the single-family residential. So I'm in favor of the project.
Sherry?
I have to agree with what's said so far. It's kind of a mixed bag here, and but there are some positives, obviously, that you're bringing a single-family product to the community. And we haven't, honestly, I haven't, but I haven't been on the commission that long, seen very many come through. None, I believe, since I've been on the commission. Although the appearance and the way this is laid out, it really looks more like a multifamily product. It isn't. And so I view that as positive. I'm hoping that the prices can come in around the median for this community, because we don't have a lot of housing right now available, new housing around the median price range. I have to agree, as much as I don't like seeing any commercial properties rezoned to residential, I'm a strong advocate of generating as much taxpayer dollars as we can. I do know that it costs a lot to support residential development, you know, we've heard all those. But in this case, I do think this is a piece of property that it is more suitable for residential zoning. It would be good to have more input from neighbors, because we just don't really get that. You know, 5 people come to the meeting. Most of those do not live in the neighborhood, as far as I can tell. So, you know, it's always difficult because we don't really hear sometimes what people who will be impacted by the property directly have to say and what their opinions are. So anyway, I have mixed concerns about it, but overall feel it's not really a viable commercial property.
Right. I appreciate Commissioner Bolt's comments about sort of the viability of this as a commercial or industrial site. We've received a lot of testimony this evening about how there is really no visibility from Broadway, which is the major commercial corridor in the area, which probably helped make the mini warehouse development not work out. I entered the meeting with some significant concerns based on what is frankly a scathing economic assessment of the proposal. However, there's land use considerations for this, particular sub area, and I think some of the other commissioners have made really good points about how a single-family product could work in this area. And it also reminds me of some of the discussion during Envision Littleton, where the consultants talked about this northeast part of Littleton being a really unique neighborhood with multiple varieties of housing types. And what we don't have in the northeast area of Littleton is relatively new housing. As folks have mentioned, most of the houses are in the 1950s. I, in my 1950s house, had to deal with asbestos. And you can eventually get those houses to be properly insulated, but it takes replacing all the windows and adding a lot of insulation. I think there may be some proposed amendments we should consider, perhaps about the orientation of the buildings on Delaware. I think someone had mentioned potential for requiring utility boxes to meet Littleton's code as opposed to what was on the PDO, or not PDO, the plan development, and mandating a certain number of gaps of at least 15 feet. So I think at this point I think it's a beautiful project, but I do definitely have reservations about the economic impact for the city as a whole.
Thank you. I agree with many of the comments my associates have proffered. I think there's a lot of valid points being made. Generally speaking, to boil it down, I suppose dirt that's likely to remain dirt isn't a big economic benefit to the community, and that needs to be a consideration. As a result, I find that based on the preponderance of evidence presented, that the proposed rezone request is consistent with the comprehensive and neighborhood plans. I trust that the applicant's stated penchant for quality control will be enthusiastically pursued, and I'm inclined to support the agreement or the amendment, the recommended motion accordingly. Thank you.
Sorry. One more thing. Just really quickly, some of the uses that are listed in the existing industrial zoning are not particularly compatible with the surrounding residential uses as well.
Okay. Well, like staff, I'm mixed. There are some definite pluses. It's nice to have single-family homes being built. It's nice that they're for sale, though of course we can't guarantee that. And we've seen things happen where we've zoned thing in a certain way and then the property gets sold and it's not developed the way the intention was originally. So I like the idea of for sale, but again, it's not a for certain thing in that way. The lock and leave seems to be popular for people. That's a plus for the demographics who appreciate that. It was really good to see the lessons learned you discussed from Littleton Village, as I live very near that and know a lot of people who live there and listen to their comments. I'm glad you learned from that. You did definitely increase the parking from what was original, but having been in communities where you have homes that are almost set up more like townhomes, they're not, but they're very close to that idea. The parking is a little bit of a concern still. I've been to too many places like that where you just can't find parking, and it's a detraction from wanting to go visit your friend there. But still, there are all those pluses. On the other side, the height of 45, especially on the south side, is definitely dramatically different. The economic analysis. So it sounds like that this might have been up for a while before, but I also know the history of South Park, where they had this exact same temptation a while ago, years ago, where they were thinking about, well, should we do residential instead of doing South Park as their business and commercial and industrial? And they held their horses, and now we see what's happening to South Park. They have some pretty strict requirements. We're seeing some new developments going in there, and the land that's been there for obviously vacant the entire time, and new businesses coming in. So I don't think we can say that that's a foregone conclusion, because cycles change, and we see that with South Park. And if South Park had done this, it would have been a whole different story for how they are able to be a business development. And residential cost city money. Sure, they bring in people with their incomes and they're disposable, but it still costs the city more because of the services they have to provide. And when I look at the vision for the future of Littleton in the citywide plan, which is what we have to look at for this, there's 9 bullets. 3 of them are about economic vitality, sustainable economics, and increase to economic development. So there is a very high emphasis on economic development in that. And in Progress Part, under Land Use Policy 2, it says that neighborhood land use policy for Progress Part proposes that the existing zoning boundaries not be changed except as it might reduce the potential intensity of development in the neighborhood. I don't see this as a potential decrease, again, because it's, like Sherry was saying, they're single-family homes, but it's set up like a multifamily home environment. And if you look at Norgan on the other side, comparing the intensity, this doesn't look like a decrease. So I'm mixed. I'm not sure where I'm going to go after this, but those are my thoughts so far.
Well, I came in Wednesday thinking I was going to be loaded for bear because of the layout that we saw at the P4 process, which the layout had some problems, which we let you know about. But the site has improved greatly. The Planning Commission over the years has looked at this site a number of times for 20, 22 years. We used to do matrix studies on particular pieces of property, including the former Marathon site, underperforming shopping centers along Broadway. I think we did Woolhurst, and we also did this site, the Norgren site, and so on some dusty shelf in the planning office, there's probably those matrix studies. So it's been looked at a lot over the years, even though it's just an empty lot. I'm puzzled by the economic report. I look at economic reality, market reality, and quite frankly, just plain reality. What is viable for this site? Retail? Preposterous. Office space? Maybe. It would be probably grade B or grade C office space, probably a 1970 style, residential style, maybe 2 levels, lots of heavy timber and wood. That type of style perhaps might work there, but I doubt it. It wouldn't be high class office space. It's the applicant in his report talked about there's no marketing window for this type of use for this site. It's buried in the residential and on the backside of buildings along Broadway. I came in, well, for years I was expecting to see a proposal with crammed-in nondescript apartment slabs. I was pleasantly surprised to see somebody looking at a for-sale housing project. The site has sat idle for many years, and somebody mentioned that the site was for sale long before 2017. There's also comments about gentrification having great harm on this site, and I'm puzzled by that. And what is the opposite? Do we approve a project that comes down in quality just so we can match the surrounding area? What kind of plan is that? The density I can live with. The density is quite in line, actually much lower than the R5 area to the south and to the east, which is 43.56 units per acre. R4 is 13, and the R3 to the north is 6.7. So this fits in comfortably, I think, with the density of the surrounding area. The site layout, as I mentioned before, quite improved with the gaps on the Cherokee side, on Powers side, and a nice layout. I like the fact that the park went into the corner, which opens up that corner. So rather than housing totally on the 2 sides, it's broken up, and the tedium of the constant houses are relieved on that corner. To me, it's a chance for the sale of for ownership of single-family residential. I don't think it's a chance that we just can't pass up here. And the alternative again is the soulless slabs of apartment complexes. I would like to propose an amendment here. Again, I am referring to sites and not the housing units themselves. The amendment would be as follows. For housing sites facing Powers Avenue, there shall be a gap of 15 feet between each cluster of 4 sites. Period. Yes, I could say minimum. Minimum 15 feet between each cluster of 4 sites.
Can I add to that amendment, or is there,
It hasn't been seconded, so go ahead, I can.
I'd like to also include that as well on Delaware, that they be.
Or did I say Cherokee, Delaware, I'm sorry, yeah. No, I made a mistake.
Oh, okay,
Delaware.
sorry. So Delaware, so could you repeat it? I'm sorry, Chairman. Could you repeat your amendment?
Okay, well, I'll say it with the minimum. For housing sites facing Powers Avenue, there shall be a gap of 15 feet minimum between each cluster of 4 sites.
I'm saying I would like that to be on, you said Powers. Did you say Powers?
It's on Powers, yes.
Okay, I would propose that it also be on Delaware as well.
So what you're saying is that since this is a illustrative plan, they could change that back to the P4 plan, basically?
But with a minimum of 15 feet gaps for clusters.
Okay.
Follow me?
But what they show now is...
I'd like to rotate the front doors to Powers and have 4 clusters max.
No, I won't make that I will make that change to my amendment.
Well, then I'll add to the amendment, then. I'll do another amendment.
You can do your own amendment. Okay. So again, I'll repeat one more time. For housing sites facing Powers Avenue, there shall be a gap of 15-foot minimum between each cluster of 4 sites.
Second.
We have a second.
Oh, okay.
Commissioner Bolt seconded that, correct?
Yeah, that's what
Oh, he did already? Okay.
No?
Which one got it first?
I thought David did, but.
I thought Dave did too. Okay,
thought
so
Jason
Bruce?
I was sitting.
Let's fight.
All right.
Okay, we have a second. Is there any other amendments here? Then we'll reverse order in voting on them.
Yeah, I'd like to make it an amendment too. Let's see if I can piece this together. First of all, I just wanted to say, I'm proposing that the units along Delaware rotate the front doors towards Delaware, and the reason for that is one of the goal number 1 of the Progress Park neighborhood. Goal 1 is preserve the existing character of the neighborhood as much as possible, preserving especially the single-family home areas. When you look at the context of single-family homes in the Progress neighborhood, a vast majority of the front doors face the street. They don't turn their sides to the street. The applicant has made several comments that the units along Powers, the units along Bannock are facing the street, they're engaging the street. That's good. And so what I'm proposing is that the units along Delaware will do the same. And again, I'll get to this amendment here in a second. I'm basically saying that the disposition of Delaware should be very similar to what's on Powers. These clusters of 4 with a gap of 15 feet. So that's how I'm going to try to craft this amendment. Unless there's...
You want to, because this is, again, an illustrative plan, it could, the Powers and Bannock could also be reimagined to have the doors facing away from the street as well. I think it might be just to generalize, have all exterior streets of this neighborhood have homes facing the street.
You don't have a second yet.
We don't have a second yet, that's fine. We'll ask for a second. Well, okay, let's ask
Right,
it
we're
now.
just, he hasn't said the amendment.
He was
either.
still crafting his amendment.
You're still
he said.
crafting, or you want to finalize it?
So I thought we didn't have one yet.
All right, let's see here. My amendment will be that all homes facing primary streets shall have the front doors oriented to the primary street.
Would you be willing to substitute public street?
Excuse me, yes, thank you. So all homes shall have their doors oriented towards the public streets. Units along Delaware shall be organized in clusters of maximum of 4 clusters of homes, separated with breaks of 15 feet.
Okay.
Minimum.
Everybody got that? Okay.
Yep.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, just any other amendments, and then we'll start the discussion working backwards. Any other amendments?
I do have an amendment.
Oh, boy.
I'd like to add a condition to eliminate stucco as an acceptable masonry material.
I would second that.
That was quick, okay. So we have a second on the stucco. Would you repeat that one more time for everyone?
Condition to eliminate stucco as an acceptable masonry material.
Okay.
Eliminate stucco.
As an acceptable masonry material.
Let us know when you're set.
Sorry.
No worries, take your time.
Okay.
Got it?
And who seconded that?
I did.
Okay,
Miller.
thank you. I'm ready.
Sorry, who seconded it?
I did.
Oh, okay. Any other amendments?
Do we want to address the landscape utility boxes?
I'm sorry?
Move to require that utility box screening meet Littleton City Code.
Good one.
Have to anyway.
I'll second
No,
that.
no, that's different than what's in there now. No, it's different.
Okay, could you repeat it one more time? Sorry.
Move to require that utility box screening shall meet Littleton City Code.
Simple.
Okay, we're on a course for a record amount of amendments. Any others?
I didn't hear who seconded that.
I did.
Thank you.
I'd like to not make any amendments.
Refreshing. Okay. Are those the amendments? Okay, discussion on Jason, a utility meeting Littleton Code.
Right, it
for
was
screening.
a point that Commissioner Schwarzbacher brought up earlier about the plan development saying, best efforts to screen utility boxes when the code is really clear that you have to screen them.
Any other-
Agreed. Very simple, direct.
Very, very simple, very direct.
It's
Any discussion?
It's a KISS.
None. Let's vote on Jason's.
The vote is 7 in favor. The motion carries unanimously.
Okay. Craig, motion, amendment for stucco not being considered to be masonry material. I'm paraphrasing.
Yes, it still allows for stone, brick, and tile to be acceptable masonry materials, being that only 20% of the front facade is required to be masonry material. That still seems to me to be plenty of diversity in materials.
And you can still use stucco, but just not as part of that 20%.
Right, exactly, correct.
So it's still a viable material elsewhere.
Yes.
And I support that as well, the Construction Specification Institute, which is basically our divisions, you'll be familiar with that, but stucco is considered an exterior finish, and there is and that's Division 9 in this Construction Specification Institute, and then Division 4 specifically masonry, and Division 4 does not talk about stucco.
Sexy when you get technical like that. Wow. Any other discussion on
It's getting late.
On the stucco, yes, getting late. Any other discussion on the stucco? Seeing, whoop, go ahead.
Well, it just strikes me that we're getting awful granular in terms of, I mean, I think they're going to, given the opportunity and the comment that, you want to make these things look different, I'm not sure why we would want to take stucco out of the menu of possibilities if it's an acceptable structural composition. Is that the issue?
No, it actually would still be part of the menu. It just wouldn't compose that 20% minimum masonry material.
But the reason it wouldn't is for aesthetics or for is there a reason that has to do with construction viability of some sort?
I think one of the comments that came up during the P4 discussion, I think that was constructive, was let's make this community more Littleton, and the idea of bringing in brick and other masonry materials that are more reflective of the surrounding neighborhoods and their use of masonry. Stucco is not traditionally a sort of historic material that's been used in Littleton. It still can be used in these homes, but just not as part of that 20% minimum. So,
Any other discussion? So we had the motion and the second. Time to vote on stucco.
The vote is 6 in favor with Commissioner Stallman voting no. The motion carries 6-1.
Okay. Now, Dan's amendment, my comment, the reason I'll be voting against it is with the current arrangement, we'll have more gaps, and the gaps will be wider than flipping the units and then having that 15-foot gap between four sites, I should say, not units, 4 sites. So I'm getting more gaps, which I think will help across the street. Yes, I do have a concern about the side view being fairly plain, and I made the comment about dressing up those facades better than you would normally if you've got a 6-foot in between units.
Yeah, I guess, would we be able to review those before? I don't know that we would be. So it's we're kind of hoping that those will be better elevations. I think just sort of what the applicant said, being able to have eyes on the street is great for defensible space, and is just more in character with the rest of the Progress Park neighborhood. That's why.
We didn't have a street view rendering of Delaware, but the one building that was shown, it's wide, it's plain, it's ugly, there's no windows.
Or few.
There's no amendment to dress up that side view. Just based on the community, there's residential across the street, more so on Delaware than there is on Powers. I mean, there's multifamily across the street, but that's pretty impersonal. I would rather have if I had to choose a street, I'd rather have Bannock and Delaware or Delaware have homes facing the street. Just, it's more inviting, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's kind of, Chairman Rudnick, the city of Denver has just recently banned slot home developments. And those elevations just are reminiscent of what these slot homes look like, where you're basically looking at the sides of the buildings rather than the front of the buildings. So that city of Denver's prohibiting them now just because of the part of character of the street is lost when you're looking at the sides of the buildings.
Dan, go ahead, Craig, were you going to say something?
Oh, yeah, I just wanted to say I would support the first half of your amendment, because I think if you'd just stopped there, it would have been perfect. I think the first half of the amendment, as I understood it, was that all homes that face onto a public street would have their primary access off that street. And it seems to me, I think the question was asked of the developer, that it's possible that these side-facing units could actually have a front entrance from the street. I might have heard that wrong, but just these side elevations could actually have the entrance coming off the street. And if that was the case, I think that would be an improvement.
Discussion? Go ahead.
I agree with I think what Mark said as far as the gaps are concerned. I don't think the layout as presented is incongruous with what we're trying to achieve. And the other side of it is we gave them feedback during the P4 process, which I know is not binding, but they took it they took it to heart, made changes, and now we're sort of going back saying, yeah, well, we were just kidding. I don't know, I think we're again trying to micromanage this thing, and I'm inclined to not want to support this.
I'd be curious to hear the text of the motion again to make sure I understand it correctly, because one way to interpret it is if there's a minimum of a 15-foot gap, the orientation shown on the sketch there could work and meet the motion as long as they put the front doors on Bannock. So I'd just...
Are you ready?
Yep.
Okay. All homes facing public streets shall have their doors facing public streets. Units along Delaware shall have clusters of 4 units separated by at least 15 feet.
4 units maximum.
It's max.
Was it 4 units maximum or just 4 units?
A minimum of 15 feet, right?
Yeah, but a maximum of 4 units.
There's also a little bit of a problem on the far southwest corner and the far northwest corner. If you look at the layout, do you turn, you've got the units are on the northwest side or facing, or the long side is, north-south. So what do you do there? You're not making an allowance for those in units. So it's like your amendment, every unit has to have the front door facing Delaware.
Yeah, that would be, that's correct, Chairman. I mean, if, really the intention were those units, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 side units there, not the far north, not the far south, that it would propose to actually rotate 90 degrees. I understand that is not specific in the amendment.
Right.
I can amend the amendment.
We have a second. How do we?
I believe I was the second, and I'm friendly to the change.
Okay, so
You're going to have to word it again, and then it's going to be repeated.
Can we actually do that, or do we have to shoot down the amendment and then do a new amendment? Since we have a second already?
You can, but it's going to be off.
You need to get rid of this amendment.
Right.
Vote on it, and either shoot
then
it
do
down
another
or approve it, and then put a new amendment. There should only be one amendment on the table at a time.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, so we have to vote on the original
Yes.
Dan amendment, let's call it.
Yes.
Okay. Any other discussion on the Dan amendment?
Yes.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, I would be perfectly happy if they just punch a door in the layout as shown there on the western walls. They wouldn't necessarily have to rotate the units. It could be something their designers figure out in the time between Planning Commission and City Council.
And I would support that. I guess what I'm asking then is, how does the commission see that it's going to actually work, or do we just trust that that they'll put doors there, or?
No, you can't do that. You can't just trust that they'll do that. Why don't we take a vote on this and then discuss doing something different?
Yeah, like I said, we got to vote and up or down and move on.
Yeah, we have to.
Everybody ready to vote?
Yep.
Whoa.
The vote is 1 in favor, and the rest of the commissioners voting no. Commissioner Reynolds voted yes. So it is defeated 1-6.
Now,
I need to.
Dan, son of Dan amendment, okay.
3 years first? Or?
Sorry? No, we're still on the amendment, so that's the main motion.
Okay.
All right, here, let me see here. There's no way to designate what those private drives are there. I guess okay, so I propose the amendment that I need to draw it. Out of the way.
Perhaps if the goal is.
I guess I'll chime in and the clerk is correct. So we're typically only voting on one amendment at a time, and we already have one already sitting on the table. And that would be
That was
Mr.
mine.
Chair.
So we have to do mine and go
Correct.
through that amendment, then you can propose.
Correct.
Okay.
While Commissioner Miller gets his thoughts together on his amendment.
All right, so these the Mark amendment. Any discussion?
You want to reread it?
Refresh us.
I'll read it if you want. For housing sites facing Powers Avenue, there shall be a gap of 15-foot minimum between each cluster of 4 sites. What I'm doing is cementing in what their current layout is showing. Because the plan here is, elevations are illustrative, the plans are illustrative. The general site layout is illustrative. That's the purpose of my amendment. Any discussion? Seeing none. Vote.
The vote is 7 in favor. The motion carries unanimously.
Now.
Okay, I'm going to try to do this here. I would like to make an amendment that the units between the northern access road and the southern private drive be rotated 90 degree, or rotated so that the front doors face Delaware, and that they be grouped in clusters of at maximum 4, and clusters shall be separated by a minimum of 15 feet.
So they have to be rotated in the sense that you want the narrow portion to be facing front than the side portion facing front. Okay.
Front doors facing.
Yes.
Okay.
And then you qualified it by let's say, the alleyway on the south end and the access entry on the north end. So the clusters of 3 to the north and south of those 2 drives, let's say, are exempt. Okay. Any discussion?
How about a second? Do we have a
I'm
second?
sorry. Do we have a second?
I'll go ahead and second again.
I'm sorry, did you raise your hand, but did you?
No, just said she said
You said?
second.
Okay. Any discussion? Seeing none.
Actually, I was just going to ask again. So you're talking about rotating to the front door, but you're not talking about any of the units behind it, just the front.
Correct.
Okay.
So what they'd have to do is add units here to make it back. So this road is going to have to move. Okay. All right. Any other discussion?
And I guess my question would be, does that require rotating the unit, or could the side be considered the front if it was designed that way?
It's not part of his motion, so.
Right, that's just my thought on this motion.
Well, it goes up or down. You can do an emotion.
My hunch
About
is
5 per customer here.
My hunch is that it's going to, that they're, it's going to be difficult to change the door position. It's a prototype building. They would like just to repeat it over and over and over again.
Okay. Anything else? Time to vote.
The vote is 3 in favor with Commissioners Reynolds, Stallman, Rudnicki, and Bolt voting no. The motion fails 3-4.
Okay, unless we have,
Repeat that motion without the word rotate.
Did you just make a motion?
Yes.
Sure, what the heck? I'll second.
oh, that went, I'm sorry, you just did an amendment?
Yes,
What-
she did.
And what does it
Same
say?
amendment, no
Same amendment, just don't rotate.
So we'll leave it to the designer. They don't have to take the building and rotate it physically. If there's a way to make the doors work and have the design work so that the doors can face the street without rotating the buildings, if they have to rotate it, they can.
And we have a second. Did you second that?
Of course.
Of course. Well, my problem with that is on the sides, you don't have much option to undulate the facades at all. If you'll notice in their main entryways, they have some little balconies, et cetera. It looks like some of the walls are moved back and forward. Here, you're just going to slap a door on a blank facade with no undulation of the facade. That, to me, doesn't make any sense architecturally. So, any other comment on the latest amendment?
Again, I think we're trying to micromanage something we're not equipped to micromanage. I think, staff can work with them as need be, and I think they're hearing what we're saying, but putting this in the motion, putting this in as an amendment to the motion just strikes me as overkill.
Can you repeat your motion, please? I don't,
Okay.
I didn't hear a motion.
It's the same as the previous motion, except that there is no rotate in the motion.
Just
It's
the word rotate.
Right, so the same as Commissioner Miller's, the point is that, we'll leave it to the designers to figure out how to make the front doors work on Bannock. I think the message for the applicant from Planning Commission is we want to see front doors facing the streets.
So I will.
We're getting bogged down in the details.
Right, and I would caution the commission to be cognizant of the fact that certain motions that you may be making may be challenging to certain densities that they're already being granted. So in terms of the rotating that could have an effect on densities. I will read what I believe is the current motion. Units between the northern access road and the southern private drive, and we're taking out the rotated, so units between the northern access road and southern private drive shall,
And they be grouped in clusters.
Let me see.
And clusters should be, separated by 15 feet. That's the motion I have.
Minimum.
I have the same one you do.
15 feet minimum. The word is minimum, 15 feet minimum.
Okay. Got it.
you got it? So, read
I
it
have
out
this
loud.
unwritten rule, if you have to repeat it 8 times, the amendment is too nebulous. So, any discussion on the Jason amendment? Time to vote.
The vote is 3 in favor with Commissioner Stallman, Commissioner Rudnicki, Bolt, and Coronado voting no. The motion fails 3-4.
Are there, I hate to say that, are there any other motions or any other amendments? Seeing none, we'll go to the main motion. Any further discussion? Seeing none,
No, I'm going to just,
Motion is amended.
motion is amended, thank you. As actually amended 1, 2, 3 times.
yeah, I had originally said that I was mixed and uncertain, but I think, again, I come down to what the citywide plan says and also what the Progress Park plan says, and the 45-foot height, to me, does not meet the mark. I will be voting no on this.
Anything else?
Yeah, I was also kind of on the fence here. I think it's compelling to me that this community can do something for an area that really needs a sort of an infusion of energy. So I'm leaning on supporting it. I would like to ask staff to work with the applicant to really work on that streetscape. I think that's the big opportunity, is to make the rest of the neighborhood better by improving the sidewalks, the street trees, get the spacing right, get the locations right, work with Excel on getting that underground. And I think those are all, I wouldn't want to put it in a condition on this application, but I just urge staff to work and focus on those elements.
Anything else? Seeing none, we'll vote on the main motion as amended.
The vote is 6 in favor, with Commissioner Schwartzbacher voting no. The motion carries 6-1.
As was mentioned, we are advisory to council. They have the final say, and I guess they have their first hearing in a few weeks, and then their public hearing the week after. Thank you. Okay. Staff report. We're still in session, so if you're going to leave quietly. Staff report, if any.
Yes. First off, I'd like to thank again Planning Commission for all of your hard work over the last 18 months in working on the comprehensive plan and transportation master plan. As you all know, that passed, so thank you very much. We're very excited as staff to have this plan to work with. We do realize that we have this time in between, and staff is working on that right now of what this work plan is going to look like for the zoning code update. So we will keep you informed as we come up with that plan. We do have several administrative reviews in process right now for a lot of properties across the city. Many of those came in prior to us changing our site development plan requirements. So those are all listed on the development activities list. We do have 3 cases that will be coming before you over the next 6 months. That's all we have in the pipeline for Planning Commission at the moment. And then, as you saw tonight, this is the first time that we've kind of integrated an economic analysis and had the dual recommendations. So we're looking for feedback on how you liked that, any suggestions on how to do that moving forward. So if you can just email me those suggestions or ideas, that would be great. And that concludes staff comments.
Any commissioner comments? All I have to say is I agree. Thank you very much for the hard work over the last 18 months, especially the last couple of months with the 400 pages of reading, multiple drafts, and persevering. And I think we have a great product. Hopefully we're all proud of it. I certainly am. Long time incoming, long time necessary. So again, thank you for all your hard work. If there's nothing else, we shall be adjourned.